Call to order this regularly scheduled meeting of the Community Development Committee for the Metropolitan Council. It's December 20th, 2024. I'm Councilmember Robert Ulligan, Chair of the committee, joined by a quorum. Thank you, council members, for being here so promptly. First item on our agenda, welcome Councilmember Tolfner. Hold on. It's December 20th, 2024.
Excuse me,
There we go.
point of order, I'm glad that came up. It's December 2nd.
Oh, where did I get? Oh, December 2nd. Okay. All right. And online it says November 18th. Oh, that's the agenda. Okay. Hold on. Let's start this again. Welcome, council members. Let's get started for the Community Development Committee, regularly scheduled for December 2nd. Thank you, Michelle, 2024. We have an agenda before us. The first item is approval of the agenda. If any community members have any changes or corrections, hearing none, we have an approved agenda. Next is approval of the November 18th, 2024 Community Development Committee minutes. Is there a motion to approve, please?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Wolf. Councilmember Johnson. Any discussion, additions, corrections? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Committee members, next on our agenda is a public hearing for comments on the Livable Communities Act Affordable and Life Cycle Housing Goals for 2021 to 2030. Did we have a presentation on this, or should we just move right in? Okay, great. Thank you, Director Barajas. So I understand from Michelle that there's nobody signed in, but I will open the public hearing. This is to consider comments related to the 2021 to 2030 affordable and life cycle housing goals adopted by one new community choosing to enroll in the Livable Communities Act Local Housing Incentives Account. LCA is a voluntary program that allows participating communities to apply for grants that support brownfield cleanup, creation and preservation of affordable housing, creation and preservation of living wage jobs, compact connected development, and transit-oriented development. We have held hearings in December of 2020, 21, and 23 to enroll a total of 77 communities. Since then, one additional community, the city of St. Anthony, has adopted affordable and life cycle housing goals and wishes to participate in the Livable Communities Act programs for the remainder of the 2021 to 2030 decade. Today's hearing is only for that new community's affordable and life cycle housing goals, which they have appropriately adopted by the required statutory deadline. So the public hearing for this item is open. I understand there's nobody signed in, correct, Michelle? And is anyone present here to speak to this item at the public hearing? Anyone? So in that case, I will close the public hearing. Public comments must be received by 5 p.m. on Thursday, December 12th, 2024. As a reminder to comment on the affordable and life cycle housing goals, members of the public who are listening may provide comment by writing the council at 390 Robert Street North, St. Paul, Minnesota 55101. You can fax comments to 651-602-1313 or email the council at public.info@met.state.mn.us, or you can record a comment on the public comment line at 651-602-1500. At the close of the public comment process, our staff will prepare a summary of public comments, and the Met Council will have an opportunity to review those comments prior to council action on the re-enrollment. Clear? We will now resume the remainder of our agenda. So we'll move on to our one non-consent business item, and that's funding recommendations for the 2024 Affordable Home Ownership Grants. We welcome a relatively new staffer who I just had a chance to meet right before the meeting. It's Emily Seddon, is that how we say it? Seddon. Thank you so much, Senior Planner, so welcome. This is Emily's first time presenting at committee. So welcome, Emily.
Thank you, council members. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and represent the LCDA Affordable Homeownership Funding, Grant Funding Program. So my name's Emily Sett, and I did join the council just a couple of months ago as a senior planner. And these, as you know, these grant rounds take several months of work from both council staff and the cities applying. So you should know that this is not all my work, and I want to give a lot of credit to the staff team here and former staff who put a lot of effort into this before I picked this project up a couple of weeks ago. So, maybe not with that one. Let's try. All right, there we go. So just to set the context, this is the third year that the council has offered an affordable homeownership grant program. It started in 2022 with a really bold choice by the council to try to reduce the disparities in home ownership. We know home ownership is a very common wealth building tool in the United States, but that hasn't been shared equally across all races because of redlining, segregation, and other discriminatory lending practices. So this program was developed to try to remedy that in the region, as well as spread the council's investments widely across the region. And so home ownership is considered affordable if it's affordable to households at 80%, living at 80% of the area median income or below. So in 2024, that's about $97,800. And the affordable price this year, it changes every year, would be about $290,300. So the program scores the applicants on these priorities of creating homeownership opportunities for Black, Indigenous, and other racial groups that have disproportionately not been able to access homeownership opportunities, and also on how well the proposals will create affordable homeownership opportunities in areas where it's hard to do so. In addition to those priorities, they're also scored on affordability and their ability to create equitable access to homeownership opportunities. So for 2024, the program specifics were defined in the fund distribution plan that you approved at the beginning of this year. This year, it was $3 million available for the homeownership grants. New this year was a project award maximum that was 50% of the acquisition and hard costs. Only acquisition and hard costs are eligible under this program. This limit was, almost all the applications were well under this limit. And this year, no local match is required because we are using funds from the Livable Communities Demonstration Account. So the process this year, applications were due at the very beginning of October. 11 applications were submitted. Staff determined eligibility based on financial feasibility and the community composition scores, which identify those program priorities of areas where home ownership has not been as accessible to households of color. All 11 applications were eligible. And so new this year, we had an external review panel of the Livable Communities Advisory Committee, 3 members there who all had expertise in homeownership programs, scored the applications on the affordability and the efforts to create equitable access to homeownership. Based on those reviews and those scores, the Livable Communities Advisory Committee is recommending that 10 applications receive funding. We're now at the part where you all review and approve the recommendation before it goes to the full council. So just, got cut out a little bit, cut off at the bottom, but just so you know where we're going, I'll go through each of the projects in more detail. But in alphabetical order, these are the projects that we're going to be seeking approval for funding, totaling that $3 million. So in the 11 applications that we received, we are recommending that 10 are funded. The Livable Communities Advisory Committee took into consideration scores, as well as this committee's intention that was defined in the fund distribution plan, that we award funds to more projects and more homes. So we really want to maximize the council's investment. So with that, starting with the top scoring applications, they recommended full funding. After that, they progressively reduced funding to partial awards, rounding to the nearest home, full home. So one of the unique pieces of the affordable homeownership program is that they're often scalable. So you can build one home versus even if the proposal was 5 homes. And so this kind of scoring process took that into effect until we ran out of funds. And so unfortunately, the application from the city of Eden Prairie didn't reach that threshold of a full home, but we have communicated with them and they're willing to accept that partial award. So a little bit more about each of the projects. Bloomington HRA is recommended for $100,000, their full request, so that they can build 2 single-family homes, each with an attached dwelling unit. Attached dwelling units are new eligible use, so it's pretty cool that some of the first ones that will be built in the city are attached to affordable homeownership opportunities. And it creates a great place for multi-generational families, as well as creating additional opportunities to build wealth. In all of these summaries, I'll say the information on the estimated market value and anticipated sales price has been provided by the applicant, and it's estimated at their time of application. So some of these projects will take multiple years to build and may change over time. The next project is with Carver County, and one of their representatives is here today if we have more questions. Specifically in the city of Watertown, they're looking to build 1 single-family home in a lot that has been vacant for a while because the house that was there previously was destroyed by a fire. There's not a lot of affordable home ownership opportunities in Watertown. Their application noted that there's only 1 other community land trust home in that city. In the city of Eden Prairie, we are recommending again that partial award, but as we go into the grant agreement with them, the expectation is that they will build 1 full home, not 0.7 homes. And this is through a partnership with Homes Within Reach, which is a partner with many of the Western Hennepin County applicants. Their intention is to preserve homes that otherwise would likely be purchased and demolished so that new, larger homes could be built. And so that's why the type of home in this recommendation says either or, because they don't know yet what they will purchase and preserve. For the city of Maplewood, we're recommending $525,000. This is a project in partnership with Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity called BB Meadows. The site a project at the site had stalled. It had sat vacant before Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity stepped in to buy it. They've reported positive feedback from neighbors. And uniquely, some of the homes that they're going to build here are a new word I learned, visitable, so that they're going to have specifically designed features that make them more accessible to people who have difficulty with stairs or need single kind of main floor living. The city of Minnetonka submitted 2 applications. The first for Minnetonka Mills, which is recommended for funding at $500,000. This includes twin homes, and the Twin Homes is a unique use at this site and is only newly allowable because of recent zoning changes. The project also has a number of site improvements, including stormwater and a playground improvement. I will note I found an error in what I submitted to the committee with this. In your packet, it says that the affordability mechanism, and in the presentation that the affordability mechanism is a community land trust. It should read restrictive covenant, and that's why it's 30 years. So I'll make sure that that change is noted when this goes to the full council. The second Minnetonka project is a scattered site project, again, with homes within reach. They are, again, don't know exactly where the homes will be, and so the city of Minnetonka is willing to act as the grantee for acquisitions across what LCA participating cities in the western suburbs. So this could, these homes could end up in a number of different communities. In Roseville, they are seeking funding for additional, through further partnership with Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity. While not specifically this project, Roseville has received funding in 2022 for a similar effort to preserve or build new homes. They have this ongoing partnership with Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity, and they are looking to continue that. And recently, again, thanks to zoning changes, their twin homes are newly permitted. So Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity is trying that out there with some of their existing projects for the first time. For Scott County in the city of Shakopee, again, one of their representatives is here in case we have questions. They're recommended for funding at $200,000. This is part of a planned 10-home project that prioritizes first-time home buyers. And according to their application, this is the first affordable owner-occupied housing developed since 2013. So definitely a needed project in Shakopee. For the city of St. Paul, we are recommending $760,169. This project at 1036 Marshall received a pre-development grant from the council previously and includes green space and a playground and room for gardens on the site. So they are significantly improving a site that has had some soil instability issues. And then the final project that we are going to recommend this round is through the St. Paul Port Authority for Serenity Townhomes. They received an affordable homeownership grant last year. Since last year's, they have Amani Construction, which is the developer on the project, has received or has a purchase agreement with the Port Authority for the land for $1. And so the progress is moving, but they are still assembling their construction financing. So this would be part of that. They have not begun construction yet. So sorry about this slide. That one line is hard to read. It is also in your packet, if it's a slightly easier place to read it. But this is the anticipated grant outcomes by affordability level. And so for me, it's easier to think about who, will be, what kind of job, what will be a person could have living in these homes to kind of contextualize all of the numbers that we throw out there. So for example, a Metro Transit bus driver, kind of based on what we've got posted now, will earn $28.84 per hour when they start. So they're going to fall into that 50-60% AMI range. And another example, the median wage in Minnesota for a restaurant cook is $18.58 an hour, nursing assistants $20.79, and carpenters $30.91, A police officer is about 4167 according to deed. And so that just kind of shows the type of citizens, Twin Cities residents, that we will be able to help through these grants. And so I'm willing to take any questions, but the funding recommendation that I have before you is that we award 10 Livable Communities Demonstration Account Affordable Home Ownership Grants, if that's not a mouthful, totaling $3 million to the cities listed in Table 1, and authorizing our Executive Director of Community Development to execute those grant agreements on behalf of the council.
Thank you, Ms. Hinton. Much appreciated. Thanks for the work on this. I also want to thank all of the partners that are here that represent project teams. Your partnership is very valued as we try to realize the council's objective of increasing affordable home ownership throughout the region. So well done. And then I'll turn to the committee in a second for questions or comments, but I did have one question just to start out, Emily, if I may. And I know we did a slightly different process using this committee review, a subgroup of the larger advisory committee. And I'm just wondering if you have any comments on how that went, or how consistent is this final recommendation with that preliminary review?
Sure. So this was the first year we used the Livable Communities Advisory Committee. All of the committee members had expressed their experience with homeownership programs. They were fairly consistent across all of the programs that they scored. And we met afterwards to kind of discuss some of the projects where they had questions or they had comments that were outside of our scoring criteria. And so we discussed those before coming to the final recommendation, where we kind of tiered the funding down through partial awards.
Okay, cool, thanks. Committee members, questions, comments on this report? Councilmember Bento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, thank you for this report. I really appreciate it, and I especially appreciated the slide with the various income levels. That's really instructive. And I just want to plead for another time my bias for Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity. I'm really pleased that they're involved with two of these projects. Their strategies, their work within the communities, and the way with which they set up families to be successful homeowners is just remarkable, and it's a fabulous model. And it continues to be stunning that one of the strongest supporters of Habitat for Humanity is yet alive today at 100 years. So thanks. This was very good.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, questions, or comments on the report? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the funding recommendation for the Livable Communities Act Affordable and Life Cycle Housing Awards. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Councilmembers Bento and Lindstrom. Discussion on the motion? Just before we vote, Ms. Hinton, I just want to thank you for the very thoughtful approach here, and thanks for your excellent explanation of that. Hearing no further discussion, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Congratulations on your first item through committee. Great.
I'm just going to suggest that we wake up the remote. Sometimes it needs to be pressed a couple times.
I see.
To kind of wake it up. But it could be a low battery too.
Thank you very much for our guests and partners who came in today. Next, council members, we have a number of information items around the Imagine 2050 plan. And so we welcome first Director Barajas to present on the vision, values, goals, and the public comment summary and next steps. Director Barajas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee members.
I'm Lisa Barajas, Executive Director of the Community Development Division. My pleasure to be in front of you today to talk about vision, values, goals, and to save some time for my colleagues who follow, I'm going to share the plan timeline first and talk a little bit about where we are. I had the pleasure to be in front of you at Committee of the Whole, so this should look very familiar to you. So as you can see, we're at that point there that says we are here. That dark blue line in the second row could be further expanded that really show the variety of engagements, efforts that the council has undertaken across the whole of Imagine 2050. So while we're talking about public comments today and our response to those comments, I do want to stress that we have been meeting and talking with folks all across the region for a number of years now, and really getting to the point where we're sharing back. And while we have official public comments that we're talking about today, our staff also has been taking the time to circle back during this process, during the public comment period, to circle back with other members of the community with whom they have engaged previously, technical advisory groups, along the way, other formal working groups to say, did we get it right? In addition to some of our other policy cohorts that you've heard from as well, the youth policy collaboration, it's collaborative, thank you, and others circling back to say, now that we've written some policy, are we moving, did we get it right, did we hear you right, as part of that continuous iteration. This more detailed slide showing where we are today in December, that at the top, the blue being December 2nd being where we are right now exactly. And later this week, the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission will also continue their conversations around public comments on the Parks Policy Plan. So particularly for the vision, values, goals section, we received 270 comments on that particular section and kind of overall process. The topics, the biggest topics that we heard about are the most common topics we heard about, regardless of whether they were positive, neutral, or negative. The common areas were around the goal areas themselves, mostly on equity and climate and a little bit on natural systems. Overall, we heard regularly about engagement and collaboration, and then comments around the length and organization of the documents. A lot of suggestions for if you organized it this way, it might be easier. Always appreciate those comments. But digging in a little deeper, some of these are going to be familiar with some additional detail around specifically vision, values, and goals. But residents generally provided high-level comments about whether or not the regional vision, values, and goals resonated with them and their lived experiences. We largely heard supportive comments of those areas, as well as whether additional suggestions for strengthening or corrections or additional things that the council could consider. As I had shared previously, residents really wanted to make sure that the needs of disabled people, elders, and youth were also served by 2050 policies. And we did hear overwhelming support for climate change mitigation from the council as well. We heard from residents that they want the region, again, to be accessible to people with disabilities and in compliance with ADA requirements. And then there was some thought given to the range of areas covered by the document that it was too broad or that there did not see connection to the council's work. We heard suggestions to celebrate the successes of the region and the things that make this region great. We also heard appreciation for the planning process overall. Collaboration with council staff in particular sometimes was called out during the planning process as well. And then we also heard comments regarding implementation, important partners to consider, needs for funding. That's a pretty common request. Do you have money for this? How are you going to fund this? Or how do we get more funding for this? And then additional comments around and ideas or topics for technical assistance that could be supported further. And just some flavor for comments on overall goals, vision, and values. I won't read all of these verbatim for you, but what we did here that support just illustrative, as well as comments around how the goals really hinge upon each other to be implemented successfully. So an example there as well. Some appreciation for the values that were noted in the plan. And then, as I noted previously, that folks really wanted to see that vibrancy of the region also reflected in the plan and really highlighting that as a part of the overall plan and as we're leading that off. Around engagement and collaboration, we did hear appreciation for the work, and especially I would like to call as an example on the far right, some commenters even called out their sector representatives, in particular Mackenzie Young Walters gets a call out here, but he was not the only staffer to be called out in comments for their appreciation for being accessible and responsive, and really walking through policy with them, hearing from them, as well as answering other questions. So I wanted to highlight that as important as a part of this work, and really just the volume of work and responsiveness that our staff have put into meeting both with local governments and organizations across the region, and meeting those one-on-one and ad hoc requests as well. What you'll see posted today is a full list of a nearly full list. I was re-reviewing the database, which has over 1,200 comments in it, and finding some that were miscategorized. So there are some additional comments that will flow into the different public comment reports that, or lists of public comments that you see today when we bring those public comment reports back to you in January as part of your action on the different policy areas. But I'll talk more about those policy areas or some of that housekeeping a little later today. What you'll also see posted with each of our policy areas today as well are working draft of proposed revisions. So the vision, values, goals is an attachment on the agenda as well. Not all revisions that we're talking about today are shown in that draft, but there are notes. They, I think, say note that this area will be updated or highlighted or will be revised in response to different areas. A lot of housekeeping corrections are already in that draft. But overall, across all areas, and this will be true for all of our policy areas, that we'll be making those housekeeping corrections. In addition, in vision, values, goals, we're reviewing the goal areas for opportunities to really provide some of that consistency for that legibility for our partners across the region so that they kind of have a shared structure to them. So not really changing the words, but just adding some structure in those areas that aid in that legibility and help the reader follow along. We will be making updates to charts and figures. Angela will talk a little bit later today about community designations and some proposed changes associated with those. Later this month at a committee of the whole, you'll be hearing about local forecast updates as well. So charts related to community designations and forecasts that are in the visions, values, and goals section will also be updated to reflect those changes and some of those breakdowns. So those are noted in that red line change. And then other minor changes that respond to specific comments. They're usually around clarifications or corrections in particular, or and I'll walk through some of those as examples. So largely the proposed areas for the revision, in addition to those kind of supporting things, at the beginning of the document, starting with landscape of the region, we'll add the full land acknowledgement language that the American Indian Advisory Council had proposed. We'll add introductory language expanding upon the successes and great things about the Twin Cities region, including language that exemplifies the successes of regional collaboration. We've had a lot of success around those partnerships in this region over the many decades that we've been at this, so we really want to emphasize that importance of partnership as well in regional collaboration. We'll talk a little bit more about how widespread the impacts of COVID-19 were across all populations. Basically, no one was untouched in that public health emergency. As I mentioned, we'll update the local forecast section that are dependent on those updates to local forecasts and community designations. And then we'll add discussion on planning for the aging population and for people living with disabilities. We expanded upon other areas, and we want to ensure that we similarly provide that same level of due diligence on these two populations as well, given how much our population is expected to age over the coming 25 years. That one doesn't work. In the intro and the regional vision, values, and goals section, we'll include language around the intersectional nature of the goals as well. There's some proposed language there right now around how the success of any of those goals is really dependent on advancing all 5 goals together. We'll also expand upon how those goals are interwoven throughout the policy chapter so that folks have a better guide of how they can see those, not just in the vision, values, and goals section, but how they should continue to see those through objectives, policies, and actions throughout the entirety of Imagine 2050. And then we're proposing to include an explanation around the relationship between these goals and how they guide the council's work, as well as provide direction or encouragement to others in the region. We did receive comments that folks thought that we were kind of directing cities to do things when really we're talking about some of the council's own discretionary funding programs. And that's kind of broadly across all our policy areas, but we really want to reinforce that here too. This isn't just a plan for others to implement, but for the council to implement in its own programs and policies and the way that we support work more broadly as the council across the region. In the goal that is our region is equitable and inclusive, we're proposing language to more clearly connect the inequities of the past to present day practices and where we see that in what appear to be seemingly race neutral policies that are on the books in different parts of the region that continue to perpetuate inequitable outcomes. We'll add an example of the application of the community-centered engagement framework. We heard appreciation for those frameworks within the plan and a request to see how at least one of those frameworks is put into action as an example. And then per the recommendations from the American Indian Advisory Council, we will update that section of this part of the plan where it says still to come. We will update it based on the recommended commitments and where they can be seen within the policy areas as well and here and provide a more fulsome discussion there. On the climate change goal, we will look to streamline the current emissions reporting section of that. We understand that there's a lot of charts and graphs and it can start to get confusing. So we're looking at opportunities for making that a little more legible for the reader while still including the most important information. And then we will update language depending on the allocation of transportation emissions from MnDOT. We reference it here that it is something that we're looking or that we expect to hear, but we had not yet heard from MnDOT on this. So we'll work with our transportation partners to make sure we have the right language here to not create any conflict with what we hopefully might hear soon from MnDOT on that particular language. And then on the natural systems goal, we'll add some additional language regarding state shoreland rules and other existing water protective state level rules that we may have missed. Those include things like the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act in the state of Minnesota that in particular applies to the Rum River within this region and a little bit on the south end too with, excuse me, the Cannon River. Making sure that we're covering all the things that do impact growth and development in our water areas across the 7-county region, and that we're making those connections more clearly for folks. So for all of us today, what we're working on is in this December and January period is preparing the public comment reports, which I have an example of on the next slide. and finalizing proposed revisions to the plans that we will be bringing to you on January 21st for your recommendation and acceptance of the public comment report. And then, of course, that scheduled adoption date with the council on February 12th. What you'll see posted with the vision, values, and goals section today is a draft of that public comment report. What you don't see in there right now are proposed responses to those comments, but I wanted to share just an example of a previous public comment report where we do have proposed responses. It looks like this. It looks pretty similar, so we would just add a column to some of those existing tables towards the end of that report, and then you would see proposed responses on there. Some of those proposed responses will say things like, thank you for your comment. Some of those proposed responses will say things like, we revised this section on this page to incorporate that, and others might be more explanatory in their response, where there might be some misperception of how certain things came about or what is responsible for, what role the council plays, or more of those types of responses. So for you today, I have a couple of questions of whether the themes and comments resonate with you, if there were any surprises in what you saw. If you have any questions about the proposed revisions to the plan on this section, or if you have any other areas of advice or feedback for us as we prepare to finalize those proposed revisions and bring them back to you in January.
Thank you, Director Barajas, and to the whole team that's been working on this. I know this represents a ton of work. I appreciate your coming periodically, so we're not trying to get our heads around this at the last minute here or anything. And I appreciate you putting questions for discussion here. And committee members, I appreciate it. This is probably one of the first times in a while that we've had full membership here, and I know we're all busy and things, so it's just great to have the full committee here. And so as we move toward the final comments report and then also approval of Imagine 2050, we're getting there, right? And so I think now it's especially important that if we do have concerns, surprises, as they're called here, questions about what we're seeing, that we lift them up now so we're giving our staff clear direction. So the floor is yours, committee members. Councilmember Wolf and then Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had expressed some concerns about some of the language the last time it came around before it went out for public comment, and I didn't see any changes that would reflected my comments, and I assumed that the notes were taken at the time and it would at least be considered, but so I didn't, do an official public comment because I figured as a council member we would have some say. So I'm kind of trying to figure out how to deal with that because there's some things in there that I really have trouble with.
Mr. Chair, thank you, council members. If there are changes that you'd like to see, I think that we take the committee direction on that. So we look for your recommendations, your conversation here, and then the direction of the committee for how we can make those changes.
Did you want to raise those now, Councilmember Wolf?
I can. The one that I brought up was the somewhat anti-law enforcement tone on pages 8 through 10 of the document, talking about the riots and whatnot. We're in a really difficult place right now for law enforcement. The council is very aware at how hard it is to recruit anybody because we can't even fill our roster of police officers here. But the riots had a huge effect on the entire state as far as the willingness to be a police officer anymore and the toll that it took on the police community. And the tone of this does not recognize that at all. I mean, there were cops all over the state who had mandatory overtime that were brought in, not just during the riots, but several times afterwards. So even if you work in a little town that's way far away, you never know when you're going to be chucked into the middle of a very difficult situation. A lot of people have left the profession. We're struggling throughout the state to get law enforcement. There's been an uptick in suicides. And this talks about all anti-law enforcement stuff and doesn't recognize the challenges that those law enforcement officers are facing every day. And it talks about people who were killed by police, but it doesn't talk about Jamal Mitchell or the two Burnsville police officers and the firefighter who were killed just this year. Jamal Mitchell died because he was working mandatory overtime by himself in a jurisdiction that normally has two police officers in a car for officer safety. He showed up on the scene. He found somebody who was sitting on the side of the road that looked hurt, and as he was putting gloves on to help that person, it turned out that that guy was the active shooter, and he shot him at close range. And they took him to the hospital and tried to save his life, and one of the ER nurses that treated him committed suicide shortly afterwards. So acting like, the police are just bad and bringing people down is really upsetting to me. It's very, very personal. I mean, my husband is a disabled Minneapolis police officer, and I don't talk a lot about what happened to us, but we have been treated very, very badly. And I've always tried I always treat Minneapolis fairly in everything we do. I have never held it against them. But this feels like kind of a slap in the face to me as a person from the law enforcement community. I've seen the pain that everybody is going through, and there is nothing but negativity towards police in this section, and that really, really bothers me.
Director Ross responds, and Councilmember Wolf, I appreciate your consistency here, and I can tell that this is an emotional issue for you. I think it is for lots of people, and I'm wondering if there's language that you're suggesting that be added, or to acknowledge the risks that law enforcement take. I mean, I'll just be really clear. For me reading this, it's facts, right? And they do generate an emotional response. But I don't feel that it's overall anti-law enforcement. And I don't consider myself an anti-law, I'm very supportive of law enforcement and work closely with them in my daily as well. So I'm wondering if you have a suggestion of some way of...
I didn't prepare suggested language,
all right.
But like some of the studies that are or news articles or whatnot that are referenced in here are more superficial than some of the deeper research that has been done that shows that police aren't overtly targeting Black communities, and that there's actually, when you do a blind study on it, you find that police tend to hesitate slightly longer in shooting a Black person than they do a white person, which goes against this narrative here that police are targeting Black people and Black communities. And I mean, if nobody believes me, and then maybe I'll just resign. But I don't want to work in a place that has that hostile attitude towards the law enforcement community.
Yeah, thank you. And please know people believe what you're saying, and I'm just trying to figure out how we can make this document more reflective of what you're saying. And so, and I don't want to put you on the spot to develop language right now, but if you know.
I would be willing to work with staff.
Perfect. Thank you. Much appreciated. Councilmember Card. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Lee.
I had
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
one more thing.
All right.
Or actually, kind of two more things.
Yeah, please.
On the issue of people being displaced for highway construction, we've had a number of studies that look at the impact on Black neighborhoods, Rondo being the primary one that they talk about, but there was also South Minneapolis area. But there weren't very many Black people in Minnesota or in Minneapolis in the 1950s when this stuff was going on. And it doesn't account for the white neighborhoods that were also torn down. The highways tended to go through low-income neighborhoods, and my grandparents were among those low-income people who lost their house. But the way that it's presented in here, and I don't have the page number in front of me, basically says that everybody was targeting the black neighborhoods, and the majority of people who lost their homes were white, just based on the demographics of Minnesota at the time. So I don't want to overstate things that we don't have data for. And I brought that up before, and it didn't change any of the language.
Thank you. Director Barajas, did you have a response, or do you want to?
No, thank you,
taking
Mr.
in-
Chair. I'm taking notes and
Okay.
looking for the section in the document to make note of it on as well.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. For the discussion, I'll go to Councilmember Lee and then Councilmember Carter. Councilmember
Thanks,
Lee.
Mr. Chair.
You were done, Councilmember Wolf, right?
For now, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I have one comment, and then I'd like to also respond to Councilmember Wolf. My comment was that I'm glad that we are still in support of climate mitigation and climate change, because the incoming federal administration has promised that they will pull back on those policies at the federal level, so it's more important that we stand fast. It's a really important issue. And I just want to, and then my last 2 points is I respectfully disagree with Councilmember Wolf. I think the shortage of police officers is a longstanding issue. I went to a college down at Northfield at Carleton 20 years ago, and during the 08-09 recession when I was graduating, there was Northfield police had a higher man shortage, and so they basically dissolved their department and was covered by Rice County Sheriff's Department. And that's like 15, 16 years ago. The issues around building trust between the law enforcement community and Black and brown communities, that is a real issue. 24 years ago, the state disbanded a so-called Metro Gang Strike Force, which was just a bunch of cops who were like playing cowboys, pulling over anybody, and most of them were Black and brown people, and they were confiscating cash, boats, RVs, right? And then they got investigated and sued, and so then the state legislature found that there was something there, and so they disbanded the whole operation. And if and there's a larger national context too. I mean, during the January 6th riots, law enforcement officers were attacked and killed in front of live broadcast TV. And going back to the 1940s, there was real discrimination against Blacks and Jews in the Twin Cities. Hubert Humphrey made his entire career prosecuting groups like the KKK who were discriminating for hiring practices that were discriminatory, as well as housing practices that were discriminatory. That's how he made his name as a national politician.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, I have Councilmember Carter, then Councilmember Bento. Councilmember Carter.
Thank you. On the point that Councilmember Wolf raised, I appreciate, being from a law enforcement family as well, the angst that the law enforcement community has suffered over this past decade, and most recently during the pandemic years. And I also acknowledge that there has been difficulty in the community as well as in the law enforcement community based on the distrust that the council member just mentioned and the need to repair that trust. I appreciate that we are not hiding from or pretending that the actuality of what we've experienced exists. And I also think there can be a way of incorporating statements to acknowledge the difficulty that the police community has experienced as a result of that actuality, which is both historic and even more recent as well. It raises high emotions for us to talk about it, but it would be unfair to suppress the actuality of what we have experienced in order to build a better future, because the difficulty has existed based on historical events that are proven, and we have to work through it. So our plan has to acknowledge that we do need to work through it, and with all respect for the willingness that the council member has expressed, Councilmember Wolf, that you have expressed to work with staff to ensure that there is a balance there that you would like to see. I want to really request that we not try to create an appearance that the actuality has not been true. We have to work through this, and we cannot put it behind us without acknowledging it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. I have in queue Councilmembers Vento, Chambliss, and Johnson. Councilmember Vento.
I'm not sure what I want to say, other than that, it feels as though we're kind of talking past each other. And I think that there's a truth in what everyone is expressing in this conversation. But one of the truths is that law enforcement is not a part of the Met Council's authority, jurisdiction. And yes, we're working with communities and counties and townships who have relationships with their local law enforcement. But I think we're taking on an issue that is bigger and more complicated than we have the time and space and capacity to address. And I think that we should leave it to the Minnesota State Legislature, to whoever out in Washington is going to do whatever they're going to do during the next 2 and 4 years. And I'm heavy on the sarcasm there, I apologize. But I can't disagree with what anybody said, and I especially can't disagree with what Councilmember Wolf said, because I can't imagine a spouse, a child, whomever, leaving home and you don't know if they're coming home that night. I also can't imagine what it's like to be the spouse or a parent or a family member of a young person, and that person may feel as though they're a target. They may be a target. So we've got folks on both sides of this, and I think we're just in the midst of a conversation that I think we need to reel it back, make a simple statement about how our region has experienced this, but I don't think we need, well, let me put it this way. In District 12, if you were to go to the majority of the cities and townships and say, is there a police mistrust in your community? The majority of them would say no. So I think what we're doing is singling out a couple of communities, a handful of communities, and making a very broad statement based on their experiences. And I think it's a mistake.
Thank you, Councilmember, and I really take to heart, well, a couple of things that you just said. I hope the committee members don't feel like we're not hearing each other, because my intent is that we do hear each other and we're not talking past each other. I do agree 100%. I think we're getting way off of sort of what the document is trying to accomplish, and I think this is a worthwhile conversation. Councilmember Wolf brought up tone, right? And this is important, what the tone of this document is. So I think this is a worthwhile conversation, but I would ask council members to try to keep it in the lane of the public response. But for me, and I'm sorry, I know I'm kind of butting in line here, this is about disparate impacts, right? It's not about sort of raw numbers or something. And, you know, talking about the freeway and what the demographics were when the freeways were built is valid. But I was part of a Hennepin History Museum kind of study. I used to live half a block from 35W. It's really my activism around that. It's what pulled me into politics and public life. And something like 80% of Minneapolis' Black population lived in the pathways of newly constructed freeways. So yes, raw numbers, it impacted more non-Black people, white people, than did Black people. But when you look at the disparate impact, it's undeniable. So for me, that's what I'm trying to find that. How do we talk about the disparate historic impacts and how our policies contribute to those and how our policies can mitigate those? And so I'll go back to Q. Thank you, committee members, for that indulgence. I have Councilmember Chambliss, then Johnson, and then Wolf. Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you. And I agree with the disparate impact comment and the complexity of some of the community issues that have happened historically and that still happen today. How you measure negative impacts to particular communities who were targeted for discrimination is very important. So when we communicate as a organization, it's important for us to communicate that to the people that we serve and acknowledge how we serve them, which is why we have the 2050 Imagine planning process. I do have an unrelated
Please.
question, and I've asked it before, and that is how are we connecting some of the rich learning, knowledge, and discovery of our prior regional development guide, the 2040 plan, for example, in terms of choice, place, and opportunity, and place-based investments that were highlighted in that decade. It is important to evaluate and report as we are moving forward in 2050, because that gives us our base and our guideline. What we learned in 2040 that is really good is obviously being carried forward, but we should highlight that, and it should be clear how we are connecting the knowledge and the information and the work from the prior regional development guide in this current Imagine 2050 vision and plan. So if we can bring forward that very important evaluation assessment, we will be able to measure our impacts for success. How far have we come? How well have we done as a region and in meeting all of our goals, including goals for equity and racial equity?
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Johnson.
I will try to be brief. So this is about inequity, and we're using COVID-19 as kind of that moment in time to kind of express that equity exacerbated, laid bare before us. That's fine, but we all know that there was inequities before COVID-19, and there was inequities before the paving of 94 or ripping open wide 35W, or I'm just going to say it, from my opinion, this is one of the reasons I have problems with Blue Line extension. I worry very greatly about ripping through neighborhoods that seem to me to be fragile with hope. So I appreciate the sensitivities around the portion of the narrative in here that speaks about public safety. And yet, I think it's important, how can we not in this moment in time, even 4 years after COVID first emerged, not reflect on it. But if anybody was paying attention, this was news to you, that's almost shocking. So this isn't, it might have opened people's eyes, but it wasn't the first time this region was struggling with racism or sexism or all the other isms, ageism and disability isms and just other isms, right? So, this document is our 2050 document. God knows what's going to happen between today and the next time we do a 10-year update. That's frightening. So I think that the point, though, is well taken. Well, we can reference public safety in here. The region that we represent has good people in public safety far and wide, including our own Metro Transit Police Department. And we made decisions here how we would respond during the civil unrest, riots, however you want to call it, and what our role should be, and I was very proud of that. But I think that we should just be sensitive that there are police departments across the region that came at a moment's notice to help, and I didn't realize across the state, and that are defending the rights of people and also trying to be partners in moving and changing and just changing how racism still persists very heavily today. So I appreciate this narrative that takes up a lot of real estate in the document about COVID. That's fine, but it was here before, it'll be here after, and I don't I just, that moment in time, the shock around the world is a thing that we will always be known for. I just hope, though, that we can also cite the sentiments and the examples of how there was a rally call around this region in particular on how to change that. And I think this is part of a rally call and showing a blueprint on how to get there. So I think that everything everybody said is true, but it's not news. It didn't start in 2020. People have, again, we all know this too, and there are references in here too. It's not just police. I mean, there are good and bad people all over the world in whatever walk of life that they're in. Just look no further than Mankato to see what horrid things were done against American Indians back in the day. So I guess what I'm hearing is there is a tone that we want to grasp the reality, and by doing so we want to recognize the hope. And in the hope, to Councilmember Wolf's point, are really great police officers and public safety officials and nurses and doctors and all the people that rush in when catastrophes happen, right? So if there's any way to at least recognize and value maybe the efforts that were undershadowed in some of the work that we've been doing in the last 4 years or before, I would appreciate it. Having been at Prosperity's front door for 18 months on a project and digging in the data that was coming out from the Dayton's administration's housing task force, I mean, the numbers aren't moving. They're not moving.
Going the other way.
They're going the other way. And it could be this moment in time, or it could just be all kinds of things. I'm not going to get political right now. But I think that is something that is a greater sentiment that I think, the changing times and what we're experiencing. I mean, so I agree that we have to be very careful on sub-narratives that are baked into this, that are very poignant in the moment of George Floyd's murder, but I don't think they're also pervasive across the region. I know Minneapolis is going through its stuff. All police departments have had to really take a close look at themselves. So I just want to acknowledge the comments. I hope there can be some statements made in here about also the people that rose to this great catastrophe and challenge and did show up and are showing up today here at Met Council to make a difference. So.
Thank you, Councilmember. Well said. Further discussion, Councilmember Wolf, then Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On some of the COVID stuff, it actually soft pedals some of the inequities that happened. The school shutdown was a big one because kids that were in private school still got to go to school. It was the public school kids that had the remote school. Private schools had the option to stay in person. And so that exacerbated learning loss even more so. And some kids just never came back. When we lost kids altogether, and now we have less than half of the kids in Minnesota that can read and do math at grade level. So there was that was a big factor. And it talks about disabled people being advised not to go out by their doctors, that it was more than that. Anybody who was in congregate care was stuck in their living place, in their room, and not allowed to leave. If you left, you had to quarantine for 14 days. So disabled people who lived in a congregate setting but had jobs couldn't go to their jobs. If they worked in a grocery store or something, they weren't allowed to go because they would have to quarantine for 14 days every time they left for their job, whereas the people who worked there could come and go. So if that makes sense.
Yep.
And I'm not going to go too much more on the law enforcement thing, but that was a fundamental change in that Derek Chauvin was in jail. People were throwing bricks and ice, frozen water bottles, and even shooting at police that had nothing to do with it. And that happened again when Kim Potter shot Dante Wright. People were taking down the badge numbers of people who were responding to collect evidence at the scene so that they could go after their families. So that was a major shift in how law enforcement is treated. And I understand that there have been mistakes in the past, but going after people's families because of mistakes in the past is wrong.
Thank you, Councilmember. I know Councilmember Lindstrom's in queue, and I'm going to try to see if we can move us into the next information item. And just to note, I really appreciate this conversation. These are difficult and triggering issues that we're talking about. I mean, we're looking at a relatively dry toast policy document, but I mean, this really shows we're people.
Toast.
Sorry, no offense to anyone here, but it does trigger emotion. And, you know, the staff that's all here that we're so grateful for, policymakers, we're people. Right, and so this is going to touch us in different ways, and so I'm glad that we feel that we're in a safe enough environment to have these conversations. Councilmember Lindstrom and then Councilmember Carter, were you requesting?
Yeah.
Okay, and then we'll try to move on here.
Very quickly, Mr. Chair, I think going back to something that I think you said or were alluding to, I work best, and I think this committee works best, when we have specific things in front of us that we can react to, specific language that we can react to. And so I would ask, I know Councilmember Wolf, you said you'll work with staff, but perhaps you, Mr. Chair, or Councilmember Carter could just come together. Maybe Councilmember Wolf could have get the ball rolling with some initial suggestions and just kind of hammer it out between just a small group of you.
Sure.
And come back to this committee with language that perhaps all 2 or 3 or 4 with staff can maybe not be 100% satisfied with, but
I like that
be
suggestion.
satisfied with. That would get this conversation further down the line.
Okay.
And if we could do that sooner rather than later,
Yep.
and not wait, you know, until the final document is before us.
Appreciate it. Councilmember Carter, then Councilmember Chambliss.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to reflect on the comments that were made in suggested changes with respect to landscape of the region. Before I do, I should just say that I really, really can imagine what it is like to be on both sides of this issue, because I am. My husband is an African-American law enforcement officer. And so the sentiments that are being expressed here, you know, on all sides of this are sentiments that we have had in our family, and not during COVID, but all our lives. And so, you know, I really, really, really do resonate with the thoughts that Councilmember Wolf shared about how our law enforcement officers who are working to do their very, very best can be cast in very, very negative hues. And there are so many of them who are, the majority of them, who are working to be their very, very best. We don't want to cast everyone into a negative hue. We simply want to tell the truth about what has happened. I want to reflect on the landscape of the region comments as a part of, you know, not just drilling down, of course, on this law enforcement issue, but as a part of addressing what I think we've all been expressing. Staff has shared that in addition to adding the land acknowledgement language, adding some introductory language expanding upon the successes, great things, collaborations that exist across our region. And I think in some of that way, in some of that work to add those kind of comments and expanding upon general impacts of the COVID-19 epidemic across all the populations, we will see, you know, a way of hopefully reflecting what many will feel as a more inclusive conversation about the history of these years. I wanted to pop back out on that because I don't think we really recognize that. But thank you to staff for making certain to add those conversations as well.
Thank you, Councilmember. I have Councilmember Chambas, Councilmember Johnson, and Councilmember Dolkar. And again, we have 2 other items to get through tonight. So just to remind us, Councilmember Chambas.
Yes, and I know we've gone through the timeline. I don't have it right in front of my face, but if there is a group that wants to, take a look at the Community Development Committee response to some of the comments, I would offer myself up as to be included as well. But I think we also should make sure that as we make any recommendations from this committee, that we understand the power of the public comments
Right.
and the process, and not to intervene in that process in a way that puts more weight on the community's vision than it should.
I appreciate that, Councilmember. And one thing that occurs to me, we've spent quite a bit of time on this that's been prompted by the tone of part of this report. And if that happens here, I'm guessing it's going to happen across the region as well. And so I do think it's worthwhile, Lisa or Director Barajas, for us to spend some time. If it's some committee members that volunteer, I'm happy to participate. I know Councilmember Wolf has already offered to. So to address this issue of tone, because if we're snagging on it, other people are going to snag on it, right? Mm-hmm. So if Councilmember Johnson, Councilmember Dolkar, then I'm going to ask us to move on, please. Councilmember Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So as far as process, I've heard Councilmember Wolf bring this up. I've thought it was an intriguing, comment. It sure sparked debate tonight once we dug in. Maybe it's the imminent deadline we're facing in this process, but had we taken this up a while back, we wouldn't be doing it at the 11th hour. So I know the process is by recommendation of this body, but there are nuggets that come out of discussions that might not have a vote to do something on, and I think that those are significant and could avoid this discussion. To the point that was made about not intervening in this process, well, we are intervening because that's our job as far as being part of the process. We are not outside of a process, but we are part of the process. And that's why these things come to us, because we reflect the goals and the values and the aspirations of the communities and the people we serve. And so I have been trying to get a handle on what my communities are needing, what their hopes and dreams are, and all of their concerns that they're raising with this stuff. And, we got the housing plan coming up next. So I want to get to that. But I just really want to push back on what Chair Zelli said at a meeting a couple weeks ago, and just push back on this notion that we would be giving more weight to what our communities want than is maybe fair. And I am here to represent my communities. It doesn't even mean that I'm going to just write all their wishes down and be, just a mindless go do what they say. A lot of times I'm leaning in to be a problem solver, and how can we fix it, or what can we do, right? But when I, look to the list that we'll get about the comments and what those responses are. So if you can color code, I'm a big fan of that. Like if it's green, it means that we did something that they liked. So I can scan through some of that real quickly, because that's what I'm looking for. I've got letters in front of me and all the things in front of me, and I'm just trying to find out, what did we do? What did we say? How did we address it? And tonight's one good example of an hour, almost coming up an hour, 45 minutes of something that could have been handled a long time ago in the process because it was raised. So I've got letters that go back to October that I've been waiting to talk about. I won't be able to do it tonight in the time allotted, but given the time frame we're on, to Council Member Lindstrom's point, we got to get on it because there's not a lot of time left. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. And final word on this item, Councilmember Dolkar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have one observation and a request. My general observation is, I think the number of comments from the local government asks for clarity between mandate versus aspirational for the council versus the region. And I think that may need to be clear. And I can see where local governments could and some of them actually did say, like, they don't have the staffing, they don't have the tool, like, if this is a mandate, what does that mean? And I think this is where sometimes I always say, like, the perception oftentimes for Met Council, I think, gets in the way of the actual work. And so just that language clarification, I think, will help. The request I have is actually for the chair and Councilmember Lindstrom and anybody who serves as the chairs of the other committees. So I'm only on CDC committee and transportation committee, but I'm starting to see differences in the way comments are being treated. So transportation committee, public comments were submitted, and I think it had much more robust comments than what we're seeing in CDC, and the staff said it was really hard to decide what to do with all the comments, so we threaded a middle and kind of left it at that. The park comments really took all of the comments and incorporated it and kind of spelled out. And I think what I'm hearing from you, Director Lisa, is that you are going to go line by line and, comment on each of the comment, at some time. So I don't know if it's just the way the staff are presenting, or there truly is differences in the way each department is handling public comments. So I think this is something the chairs need to watch out for and make sure it is the same public process. And again, I'm used to more on the rulemaking side of the state, where you are required to make sure you consider every one of the comment, and there's no such thing as not taking an action on the policy language changes that groups are requesting. And so I'm seeing that differences between the two committees. I actually prefer the version that you all are presenting versus what got presented in the Transportation Committee. But I think so if the chairs of the committees could make sure to coordinate with the regional administrator and the chair of the council, and make sure we are consistent in the way we're handling public comments. That would be
I appreciate that, Councilmember. Director Barajas, did you want to comment before we move on?
I'm happy to answer that. And what you're seeing is probably just a matter of timing. Because for all of us, we will have a full public comment report for every section of the plan. It will include that response to comments for every single comment. So what you're hearing is we're trying to not overwhelm you with the hundreds of comments, but try to tell you the themes and the big things that we're capturing in those conversations. I just happen to be able to get my draft version going before others. Sometimes it helps to be a director in those regards, but as these move through the process, as we get into those January months in all of the committees, that's what will be presented is both the red line changes, the response to public comments that are that comment by comment, and a summary version of what does it all mean? What are the big things, the big takeaways from that process?
Thank you. Maybe I should have asked.
It's totally fine.
No, it's always good to
We're
be
like in the
clear.
middle of the sausage making right now.
Great. Yep.
Mr. Chair, just quickly,
Yeah,
Lisa, when do we
Councilmember.
get the next round of draft to review again before what again happens?
January 21st is the next time we'll be back in front of the Community Development Committee with the red line drafts and the public comment changes. Our typical posting date would be January 15th. That's the Wednesday before that. We will aim to get you something sooner than that, or post things as they become available and make those available sooner than as soon as we can, so that you have time to read those.
And will that be the only item on that agenda?
It will be close to the only items on the agenda. Yes-ish. There may be some,
Consent or something?
There may be some items on consent. There may be some other items, since we have to be responsive to comp plan amendments and long-range plans from regional parks and trails. So yes, we try to keep that agenda clean.
Mr. Chair, the reason I'm asking is it is just really difficult to plow through that much and have, a regular life too, because a lot of us work and have things going on. And that's where I feel so pressed to keep pace with where you guys are at. And then we get an hour or two to discuss this massive plan that's going to impact the region and tens of thousands of people, and have these questions. And that's when we go into these, I'm going to call them rabbit holes with all due respect, because we get stuck on something and we need the time. And there's a lot tonight that's in this housing plan, and I've got all my city's comments here, and I'm just trying to understand where are they showing up? what are we doing? Read Metro City's comments. Thank you, Councilmember Dolcar. A lot of what Councilmember Dolcar mentioned was Metro Cities getting concerned about overreach, the things like that. And I can't look at a red line piece 4 or 5 days in advance if I even get to it at that time and understand what we're doing to actually address these opportunities and challenges that are presented to us. I can't do it. And so either I sit here and just kind of go with it, and I serve on the 2050 guide plan. I've had more than anybody, and it's still hard. So I will say I'm hopeful, but I feel like we're going through the holiday season. We're very compressed. And to find the input that some of us have given all along, like Councilmember Wolf said, or to find the common threads in the communities that we represent is very difficult when you're into Redline. And so I'm just feeling really, really stressed about the process at this level. Now, if I'm just here to go, and Mr. Chair, I think they're doing a great job too. The smartest people in the room are over there. So it's just, we have to keep pace with you because we're supposed to be accountable in this process. Otherwise, I don't know why I'm here. And that's where I'm becoming very frustrated. So I just want that out because we're at 33 minutes to go and we have the whole housing policy stuff that's sitting here untalked about.
I don't know that we'll be out of here in 33 minutes, but I appreciate that, and I appreciate the sentiment. And it's a good transition, I think, into the housing policy public comment summary.
If I may, Mr. Chair
Yeah,
and council
Director
members,
Ross.
it's why we're trying to bring you the themes, the big stuff that we're in, and provide that as a guidance for the types of changes that we're not just giving you red lines, that we're trying to guide you through how we're proposing to respond to those changes by showing both this in summary form, but also when we, in our public comment reports, we'll also include a summary of the types of changes that have been made, so you don't have to page through every single comment to see what the changes are, but to provide that at a higher level as well. So we try to kind of get that high level, the next level, and then down in the weeds, as well as the document itself. We know it's a lot, which is why we're trying to provide as much of that guidance as we can along the way.
Appreciate it. Thank you. On to the housing policy public comment summary, Ms. Berkey. Oh, she looks like she's hesitating. Maybe she's.
I kind of forgot it was my turn. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I'm Sarah Berkey. I'm the Senior Manager for Housing and Livable Communities. Pleased to be here at this stage in a many-year process, getting close to the end and feeling some excitement about that and about looking forward to 2050 for housing policy in the region. I'm going to share just, again, a summary similar to what Director Barajas did and really focused on some high-level themes, and then also sharing as attachments a much more detailed report on every single comment we received that was categorized as a housing policy comment, as well as a red line version of the plan that shows you how we're incorporating maybe not 100% of those comments yet, but as many as was possible to get ready for this presentation. So we received more than 180 public comments from 4 different county governments and 25 cities that represent all 7 counties in our region and all kinds of community designations except for the agricultural ones. We received comments from individuals as well as from housing organizations, state department, associations of cities such as Metro Cities, and we received a lot of targeted feedback as well from our American Indian Advisory Council, our technical advisory group for housing, other regional housing groups that convene cities and interested parties in our region. So we were really pleased with the level of engagement in the public comment period. And many comments do overlap some with other policy areas. This is really focused on housing specific comments, but you'll notice land use incorporates a lot of housing topics as well. And I know Angela is here next to talk about land use tonight. Overall, I'd also want to let you know that feedback was, not all supportive of everything, but largely pretty positive. I wasn't here 10 years ago when we did the 2040 housing plan, but that was the first housing policy plan that had been created as a standalone effort by the council in many years at that point. And I think With that experience under our belts, this has been a lot less controversial, less drama overall this year. No one is saying you shouldn't have a housing policy plan. We have a lot of acceptance of kind of some of the key tools we use, such as the allocation of affordable housing need in the region. And I think just overall, there's better understanding in our region of our role in housing policy. So there were some supportive comments saying, yes, these are the issues our region is dealing with. We really appreciate the engagement. We appreciate the flexibility that's built in for different communities who can find their own way to be in alignment with regional policy goals. And some folks have noted that we do have a lot of collaboration between the different divisions and the different policy plans that's evident this year, at least compared to in the past. We got some concerns and questions that really just require clarification. So our team, and I do want to thank our team, by the way. So we have a number of them here, Olivia and Maddie. We have Maya listening in remotely, I know, and many others who contributed to this work, probably far more than I did. So I really thank them. And they're still working very hard to reach back out, make a plan for talking with a lot of the communities that submitted comments in cases where really they just want to make sure they understand what's in the plan, and in many cases can reassure them that the concern they're expressing in their comment probably wouldn't be an impediment to anything in their plan. Some of those specific things around density requirements and land use, land guidance for affordable housing, reporting requirements, what is an existing housing need, what is a future housing need, just kind of understanding all those very technical tools we use based on the statutory framework we operate within. And we heard some concerns just about the overwhelming cost of developing affordable housing. And that's something we can influence but not completely solve for, and we want to acknowledge that. We heard, can the Met Council actually have more of a stick kind of policy to really promote affordable housing development more proactively? We heard interest in more climate mitigation strategies and more encouragement for us to partner. And really, I think our commenters see us as part of a much larger housing system, which doesn't have enough resources and which should collaborate as much as possible. The proposed changes, I've categorized them here in terms of what requires clarification, where we're going to add some language into the plan that really doesn't change the context, but it provides kind of a little more clarity for the reader where we realize we weren't being understood well. Similarly, some context added in terms of why a particular policy might be relevant, and some areas where we're going to actually add content based on very specific feedback that we got, and we said, yes, we think that makes sense to add or change. This is a very quick overview. In our proximity and choice goals, we're talking about fair housing in the region, geographic choice in the region, and options to own or rent that can be accessible for all households in our region. In this area, we'll provide some additional clarification about how we partner with others, how we can explore support for specific kinds of housing investments, such as manufactured home infrastructure, providing some more options about technical assistance that can support local needs. We're providing more context about racial disparities in our region, some of the reasons that you see the actions that are in the plan. Again, more context on the cost of development. And in all of our content areas, we're incorporating our American Indian Advisory Committee recommendations and making sure that they can be operationalized in a meaningful way. We were asked to encourage more types of rental housing, both for very small households and for large households, and ensure that we have that in mind. So that was one thing we added in this section that we're proposing to add anyway. In the next section of the plan, we're focused on dignity and decency. So this means stable, affordable, and dignified places to live for everyone, especially addressing housing insecurity and homelessness, as well as the quality of housing, ensuring that housing is healthy and accessible and can be preserved. And in this area, we're proposing to do some more clarification about how local housing policies that the individual local governments may put in their plan, how that will affect any comprehensive plan amendment requirements they might have, how they will actually identify and use some tools for encouraging development, and we'll talk more about that in the end of the plan, which is focused on implementation guidance. aligning some language, providing more background on needs, and talking about how we can incorporate data around homelessness and the need for shelter in our region. So I'm moving fast because I know that we are busy tonight. The final section of the plan includes objectives around cultural connection and well-being, seeing homes, not just housing, as the goal, equity and repairing historic and ongoing injustice, and environmental justice, specifically around the impacts of climate change and how we invest in housing in our region to improve health. So in those areas, also, we're providing a lot of clarification about how different kinds of housing development and rental housing specifically can play a role in meeting our objectives. There were some interesting comments around utility costs and how that's calculated, so we'll clarify that, and again, include some very specific suggestions that were made, such as talking about water efficiency and not just about energy efficiency when we talk about efficiency investments and how they're targeted in the region. A lot more about how we will provide technical assistance and kind of what are the commitments the council is making to help advance these objectives as communities do their planning and implementation of their plans. And then the last section of our draft plan is really focused on bridging between policies and actions and the implementation of those policies and actions. So this section is really just a preview of a much more detailed handbook that we'll put together once the plan is approved that helps map out and provide resources for communities to really implement the housing elements of their plan. We got a lot of questions about how our requirements will impact communities. And again, in many cases, we can follow up to say, you know, we really think that you're misunderstanding what's required versus what you just need to report on, or maybe misunderstanding what's a need versus what's achievable. And we do see a distinction between those things. So we want to make sure that language is really clear. And we're looking for some opportunities to narrow the requirements that were proposed in the draft where we receive feedback if our internal analysis determines that a requirement would be difficult to calculate, difficult to implement or enforce. So there's a couple of minor changes there you may notice, such as removing the idea of reporting a percentage of the city's budget that's spent on housing. We have other tools that are similar and that are already in use, and that probably wouldn't add much to be worth the hassle of implementing that idea. So next steps, similar to all the other plan elements that we've talked about tonight, we'll be following up with some of the individual commenters to just make sure that they understand and we mutually understand how their concerns can be addressed. In many cases, we heard concerns about the land guidance for affordable housing requirement, but we noticed that the cities with those concerns almost exclusively were already in compliance with that requirement, would have quite a lot of what we'd call buffer in terms of their current land guidance, so they probably wouldn't run into any difficulty in meeting the requirements that would be in the plan. But we will be looking to incorporate some additional updates to the plan as we consult with our colleagues, with all of you, and across all the different plan areas to look for ways that we can strengthen our alignment. And then, as I mentioned, there will be more detailed implementation guidance that we put out to communities once the actual plan is approved by the council. So again, just wanted to check in. Do these key themes and comments resonate with you, and what questions do you have for us?
Great. Thanks, Ms. Berkey, for your efficiency in getting through your report and for you and the team's work on this and discussion. Councilmember Wolf, then Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Somebody, I think it was the Metro Cities letter, talked about concerns about having all of the priorities for livable communities funding in this plan instead of being flexible to be, changed as time goes. And I really agree with them that this isn't the place where we should be deciding, particularly when we're supposed to be having a big conversation about it over the next year. So I didn't see that was answered in the changes.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Berkey, a response?
Sure. Chair, Councilmember Wolf. What we have in the current draft plan is largely just documenting kind of how these housing policy priorities, many of which aren't shifting very much from plan to plan, how those are implemented in the Livable Communities Act grant program. LCA is designed as an incentive for affordable housing policy in the region and to encourage communities to adopt affordable housing goals, as we saw earlier today, and then to give them resources on this competitive basis to achieve their housing policy goals. And so I think LCA is always guided first by the housing policy plan and other parts of the regional development guide. That's in the statute. And so we want to make sure where there's a clear connection between how the council makes its investments and between the housing policy priorities that we document those.
Councilmember Wolf?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It seems to me like we've got the cart in front of the horse. We're either going to need to potentially redo the policy plan if there's differences that come up with the next year of discussion, or we just let livable communities' decisions be separate from the policy plan. I guess I just respectfully disagree that we should, things that, some of it's pretty specific of we're going to fund affordable housing ownership or different things that we really should be discussing with cities, particularly with all of the new money that cities have of their own, and how we can best work with them rather than project ahead of time what the priorities should be for my theme in all of this is we should be doing with cities, not to cities. And that actually came up at the Land Use Advisory Committee meeting as well, that it feels like we weren't talking about housing, we were talking about land use, that there's a perception that we're doing to cities rather than with them. There was also concerns, there's some cities that are a little bit jumpy or, not really trusting of us because in the actual processing of their comprehensive plans, in the last round, it came up that cities believed that they had answered all the questions, but it was being sent back as incomplete because housing staff didn't like the answers. And that came up from several cities when we did the after action report. So I can understand their concerns there, that just answering the questions the last time wasn't enough. So what is it that we're going to do? Another thing that I had a concern about is I've expressed several times that for below 30% AMI, we should be including transit access as at least a part of the formula, and that was not discussed or included because many of the people who have below 30% AMI needs don't have a car or the ability to drive or both. And some of the questions that I asked last time about the demographics of the below 30 AMI people would be helpful in this to understand the needs, and I didn't see that in there. So if we do have that information, it would be a good place for it.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Response, Ms. Berkey, or?
Sure, a couple of responses. And yeah, we did have a discussion about 30% AMI households, I know in October when there was a lot of affordable housing data presented. So I want to make sure to go back and reshare that and add a little more color to the questions you asked last time. Apologies for not getting that back to you yet. And we can send an email around with some more information if that's helpful, and certainly also look for ways to add the context to the plan. In terms of the transportation access, it is already incorporated in the formula of our projections in terms of population growth in the region, where we anticipate household growth to be and which households in which communities. So that does go into the allocation of affordable housing need. It is important that we recognize that people at 30% AMI and below do live in every community in our region. And it's a regional fair housing concern to make sure that there is a place for everyone to afford to live.
Thank you. Yep, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The transit access is looked at in projections of how many people overall are going to want to live someplace. But prior to this decade, the formula actually included a transit access factor as well, that was taken out the last time this was done. And I don't have concerns about doing that, for the higher income bands, but below 30 in particular is one that is very difficult to serve. And places like Belle Plaine have expressed concern that if you build it out there, it's really hard to fill it up, because unless people have somebody nearby that can give them a ride, they're stuck.
I'm sorry, looks like Director Ross, did you want to comment, or?
I just want, thank you. I just want to emphasize what Sarah was saying, that the base level forecast for every community already include transit access. It goes not just into the population totals, but into those income bands as well. The income bands that Sarah is talking about also relate to that job housing match. So if you have low wage jobs in that community, there should be housing there to support those jobs as well. So it doesn't mean that a low wage or a 30% AMI person is going to need to drive necessarily 10, 15 miles to the next town to have a job. It's to match that housing opportunity with the job opportunity that already exists in that community. So that's why you're going to see that 30% AMI in a lot of communities across the region, because they have those job opportunities.
Councilmember Wolf? Okay.
I'm hearing a hard no, so.
More that we'd already incorporate that transit is already a consideration. If we added another transit factor, it would serve to amplify it more than it's already counted. So we'd be double counting essentially.
Yeah.
Moving on, Councilmember Johnson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Love Metro Cities, great organization. I think they do a great job, and we, of course, at the council appreciate working with them on behalf of their member cities. So I do appreciate Councilmember Barasas, Director Barasas, what you said earlier about making sure that our policy statements are clear and concise and organized in such a way that it's good for our partner users and all that, because I saw some of that feedback too in your remarks earlier. They also had mentioned that we say that the Metropolitan Council will support in local plans. Statements like this about our support indicate to them that we're weighing in on local plans in more of a review and comment role, and maybe starting to just step over our boundaries in kind of our role, and maybe these should belong in the local planning handbook instead, which, under technical assistance and guidance to local officials. So when we say we're going to do something, is it something that isn't a guidebook, or is there additional process in review or something that they could be expecting out of that? The guidebook is the one that they would be supporting, which I would support too. They remind us that our council's authority is limited in scope with the housing policy plan, and I like to remind ourselves of that at the Met Council as well. Also, they mentioned too that under Objective 5 in the housing policy plan, local comp plans are to include consideration of tools to enhance the social and economic capital of residents in newly constructed affordable mixed income housing with namely mental health, job training, educational services, important services like that. But they do say that, it's cities that aren't usually providing those services. Those would be partner services, and to just make sure that that's very clear, that it's not a mandate on the city, but to delineate who's providing it. And if we can't do that, they would prefer that that be eliminated, because it would feel like another mandate on local governments. There was, and I get a lot of this is also coming from my communities too, but also in Section 4 articulates new requirements that the city comprehensive plans identify 3 specific housing needs representing the greatest needs of the community. Currently, local plans must identify public programs, fiscal devices, and other actions to be undertaken in stated sentence. So I think there's some concerns from the metro cities and some of my cities that mandating that might actually have, I think, a counterforce against what they're trying to do and trying to work with the opportunities that they've got within their market, rather than just expanding to be something that they might not be able to accomplish. So we can dig deeper in on that if you want. And there's other things. You guys all have their comments. I don't know if I saw them. I have to look at all the comments section, but I thought they did a really nice job of just, again, outlining where they have, appreciation of our partnership and thanks, and then also areas that they're concerned when we start to inch toward mandates or inch towards things that are maybe going beyond what they believe, not what they believe, but what the legislature enables to cities to control some of their own destiny. So, and I won't go into the other stuff because I'm anxious to get to land use too, but before we get to January 21st, I would like to ask staff to sit down with me and just walk through my pile of letters here from cities and find out where their comments are in here, because I don't want to read them on what we did on the Wednesday before January 21st, is it? I want to know ahead of time so I can go back to my cities and ask, how'd that feel for you? Are we headed in the right direction?
Great.
Some of you know I was trying to pull a meeting together with suburban edge cities, which is more about the land use policy we'll be talking about. That can't happen based on the timing and all of that business, which is fine. But I'm going to do it with my communities one way or another. And so I appreciate staff support in that, so thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. And I'm seeing nodding heads from both Director Barajas and Ms. Berkey about this one-on-one. So thank you and good. Great. Further discussion, Councilmember Dolkar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have two comments. I think one, I just wanted to highlight the comment that Minnesota Department of Health provided. I think they talked about water efficiency and then sewage system and water connection with the mobile homes. And I think that's one category of housing that I feel like I haven't talked about it at all within this unit. And I think we've seen the news report about predatory land use with mobile home, and I don't know what communities in our Twin Cities area or the metro area are impacted, so I just wanted to lift that up. The second one that I think that I'm going to make as a recommendation down the line is around 30% AMI, and I think I've said this before, like the more I see the data, the more I hear presentations around it, and I'm looking at all the local governments who are talking about the fact that it's really hard to build 30% AMI housing, that I wonder if this is something Met Council and Minnesota Housing Finance Agency should hold like a joint convening of a sort with the local governments to talk about the challenges, because I feel like it's a consistent challenge that's showing up. And I recognize that challenge, and then I see the need for those housing that needs to be built. And I don't know of anyone but the government who can actually build it. And so that would be my recommendation, but not something to do it in 2024 or early 2025. It's just in the future.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, comments, responses to the questions? We are going to move into the land use policy presentation and conversation. So I hope council members who can stay will stay with it. Okay, understood, Councilmember Bento. Yeah, I get it. Okay.
We start at the end and work our way to the beginning. Right. I mean, hopefully all of us have read this. That's all I'm saying.
I'm sorry, what was the last thing you said, Councilmember?
I just said I think hopefully all of us have read a lot of this and can
Yes,
kind
I
of
would
jump
hope
to
so,
the
right.
punch before some have to leave.
Cool. All right, anything else from Ms. Berkey? Seeing none, otherwise we'll move on to Ms. Torres to present on the land use policy. And I don't know, Angela, if you heard what Councilmember Johnson said, but she said something, start at the end.
Yeah.
So with the questions or?
Well, and only Mr. Chair.
Yeah, please.
Not to circumvent, a wonderful
Right.
presentation, but in 6 minutes, man, Angela's going to have to be a speed talker. And, I don't know if this can be continued or if this is it, so.
Well, and we'll look to that. I don't know that we have to end at 6. That's what I was saying, I guess. If people,
Don't want people to drop off.
right, and we're already losing some. So anyway, let's see how far we can go. Director Barajas, maybe get some thought if we need more conversation. But Ms. Torres, this is your time. So welcome.
I'm not clear if you want me to skip my presentation
No,
or
we
not.
want your presentation, I believe, right? Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. Oh, it's a long one.
Sorry. I will try and move quicker. This is what we're going to talk about. We're going to move forward. Somehow the clicker isn't working?
No clicker
Is
not
that what
working.
this is for?
Yep.
Okay, here. Okay. I do want to talk a little bit about who participated. Land use and transportation comments overall of all 1,200 plus comments we received were the most commented on. The land use comment was tagged in over 450 individual comments. So we are managing a high level of participation, which is really great in a lot of ways. Local governments really represented the bulk of the land use commenters. 75% of the total land use comments were from local governments. Residents represented 35%, state agencies 9%. I will try and keep moving. So I mentioned that local government participation was the most prevalent, and I want to break that out for you a little bit in more detail. 53 of 181 cities and townships provided land use comments. We had some additional meetings with sector representatives with communities that didn't submit a letter. We met with many communities. Some of them simply submitted a letter, and so we counted it in that way. Suburban edge communities had really high levels of participation, as did suburban communities. Urban edge and rural centers more in the middle level, and urban communities and the remaining rural service area communities had lower participation. So this chart shows first the number of communities that are assigned in each community designation. This then is the percent of the population represented in each of the community designations. And finally, this identifies the percent of communities submitted by community designation to give an idea of who we are working with and in partnership with as we're trying to work through some of these comments. So just a note though, there are 130 communities that didn't comment on land use. So that's region-wide, there's 181 communities. We did have comments from 4 counties, so the 181 only count cities and townships. That's for communities that didn't participate for a variety of reasons. We can assume that some of the non-commenting communities were not opposed to the policies because we're more likely to hear about objections than we are about support. We may not have heard from some local governments because of resource constraints, as you've been talking about in other areas, and prioritization of staff effort, which is understandable. On the other hand, they may have had enough opportunity for input and they didn't feel like they needed to respond. So what did we hear by land use objective? Objective 1 is related to growth management, and the public comments indicated support for the rural and ag policies. There was wide support for flexibility, but it was paired with requests for additional clarity on what flexibility might look like. We had a lot of feedback on density policy where suburban edge communities were very concerned. There were fewer density comments in the other community designations around transit station areas or for affordable housing, at least in the land use comments. Objective 2 is related to transportation, where there was strong support for coordination between land use and transportation, especially to achieve regional climate goals. I'll skip ahead to Objective 3 is related to community well-being, and there's strong support for public spaces, so much so that I added it twice on the slide, apparently. What that should say is that there were requests for guidance on tracking specific land uses within particularly planned mixed-use districts. There's always a desire for funding to enhance and improve public spaces, and in other things like the transportation comments also included funding comments as well. Natural systems had broad support. I think that that is the one area of commonality across all community designations and all policy areas. There was still requests for more clarity on natural system corridors and concerns about the impacts that density might have on achieving some of those goals. Objective 5 is centered on housing, where comments consistently focused on the need for a diversity of housing options. Comments acknowledge the importance of equitable access to housing and economic opportunities for marginalized communities. Concerns about policy which require more than one housing type in the land use categories, and then concerns that are affected local control issues in that aspect. Opportunities, though, we look at them as opportunities to provide more practical guidance and terminology and funding, technical assistance, and others. Objective 6 is the land use and equity objective. There was broad support for equity-related policies and support for the Met Council's equity commitments. There was, again, asking for clarification on what that policy language might mean for local governments, but there was curiosity expressed in what that might look like at the local level, so opportunities to provide some resources for local governments there. Objective 7 is the climate change objective that addresses the new statutory requirements. There's strong support for mitigation and adaptation commitments, positive reactions to inclusion of food security, and requests for clarification on terminology and available financial resources. Broadly, there was overall requests for support and technical assistance, knowing that these areas are new for local government planners. Objective 8 relates to economic well-being, and comments acknowledge the importance of addressing economic equity, but questioned how it might be implemented in the private sector where they feel like that's the appropriate role. And there were concerns about resources, questions on engagement requirements, and the need for clearer language, which we've tried to address. Land use comments by participant type, advocacy and nonprofit organizations provided really high-level comments, more about support or not for policies providing recommendations to strengthen different areas, usually based on the advocacy organization's mission. And there were supportive comments for land use and density, indicating that it's tied to benefits for climate change mitigation, affordable housing, and overall growth throughout the region. They offered recommendations related to flexibility in minimum requirements, transit station areas, performance metrics, and opportunities for streamlining processes for affordable housing permits. I mentioned a couple times now that local governments are the primary commenters, so I want to talk about first areas of support. So while I know that the conversation today will inevitably focus on areas of concern, I don't want to gloss over areas of support and appreciation from local governments. We received thanks for many aspects of the planning process, appreciating the opportunity to engage early and often with the council throughout the planning process, and appreciation from many, but not all, of the role of the Met Council. I need to mention that to just recognize the work of staff and policy teams that have spent such a tremendous amount of effort and energy implementing really intentional engagement programs with community and with local government for many years now, in addition to the daily support that we provide for local governments. That often gets lost in these conversations, and I want to just acknowledge and thank our partners throughout the region in this work that helped craft the policy that was published in the 90% draft. My staff is here from Local Planning Assistance, some of them, and they are some of the authors and some of the key reasons why the engagement was so extensive and widespread throughout the planning process. So, that being said, there was overall support for and alignment with regional goals, the vision and values, appreciation of the flexible application of density requirements, of collaboration and engagement throughout the process, and the intersectional connections across policy areas. A lot of the rural service area community comments were supportive of the council taking a role in resolving annexation issues, which we've had before the council earlier this year. A lot of the there was support also for mixed-use development and walkability. They appreciated efforts to protect natural systems, were supportive of more diverse and affordable housing. Local governments were largely supportive of climate resiliency goals, supportive of the vision of Imagine 2050, and support of historically marginalized and vulnerable communities was recognized as strategically important for the region. There were consistent themes as areas of concern for local governments that provided feedback during the public comment period as well. Concern about local infrastructure services related to the density requirements, concern about harm to community character, and that the market doesn't support it or that there isn't political support locally for density. Consistently concerned about flexibility as it applies to density policy implementation. Concerned that there will be negative outcomes as a result of the density policy. Those comments included concerns about forcing development, which would harm the environment, increasing vehicle miles traveled because of more people commuting, and concern that density will increase development costs, which could impede affordable housing goals. Takeaways on land use and density from participating local governments. We know and expected that density would be a primary topic of most of the land use feedback, so I want to share a bit about that. Of all comments received, 93% submitted comments on land use. So across all of Imagine 2050, as I mentioned, it was land use and transportation that received the highest mentions of policy areas. Specific to density, we know that throughout the region, 82% of communities didn't express concern or objection to density policy. This includes more than half of the suburban edge communities. Of the letters we received, though, 16 of 53 didn't oppose density changes, which means the opposite did oppose. Ag and rural center communities, as well as urban and urban edge communities, express less concern about density requirement changes. I'll just mention quickly that in the rural service area, agricultural, diversified rural, and rural residential communities are in policy areas where we largely didn't change any policy direction in the rural service area, including rural centers. Their density requirements didn't change either. So just keeping that in mind as we're hearing some of this. Ag and rural center communities, as well as urban edge and urban communities, express less concern. The rural residential, diversified rural, and suburban edge communities express more concern. And we know that of the communities that provided feedback, many were concerned or opposed to density increases, specifically in the urban edge area. 31 communities from the urban edge, 21 from suburban edge were opposed or expressed concern about minimum density requirements.
Mr. Chair, just
Yeah,
a
a
point
question,
to that. Thank you
Councilmember
for
Johnson.
kind of stripping back kind of what the concerns or hopes for each community are. I mean, if they're already meeting their densities and exceeding, in many cases, their densities, they're, like you had said earlier, they're probably not going to put that on their list because that's a checkbox. We did that. So again, 82% of the region didn't express opposition. Yep, that makes sense. But when you saw those indicators earlier that suburban or emerging edge, they're the ones that have the orange bar line, you know, kind of hitting way to the right side of the thing. So that's like when you go for your health plan and everything, your blood work's coming through, and then all of a sudden you see your blood pressure. Oh, that's the one thing I need to pay, because like, right, that's a thing I'm going to pay attention to. So appreciate the hard work that went into this, because you know, it's not always just about the going from 3 to 4, even though we're going to hear about it. There's a lot more that gets layered into it. I know that. But I just don't want to also give the impression that all those other communities are cool with it. They're just worried about their own cities and, you know, probably not nosing into their neighbors as much.
Thank you, Councilmember. Ms. Torres.
We'll talk next about the proposed changes to community designations. We knew after the original density analysis was provided in May that we would need to make some changes, manual adjustments to community designations. We were expecting that. We wanted to talk with communities through that. So I've provided a couple of maps here for you purely just for reference. This was the Thrive map. This was the 90% draft designations. Here are the community-specific changes that we are proposing. There are 15 communities here. Various reasons as to why we're proposing changes. Some are corrections. Birchwood Village shouldn't have been changed, and it was an error. There are 1 or 2 more like that. West St. Paul, South St. Paul, for example, in Thrive were a higher designation, and we don't typically see a decrease of designation for that would include a lower expectation for density requirements, especially in those most urbanized communities. We talked with each and every one of these communities, and so they're aware of and mostly supportive of the changes. When talking with West St. Paul and South St. Paul, for example, they're like, we're already doing that. We're planning on meeting that if we're not already. And so their plans and their 2040 plans are already largely reflecting that. Now, as I mentioned, there isn't usually a downward application of community designations. However, with the proposed density changes, we This reflects communities like the Lake Minnetonka communities that may have been suburban in Thrive, actually reduced to, which was 5 units per acre, reduced to a 4 units per acre designation in Imagine 2050. This is because in looking at their comprehensive plans and in talking with them, they're either fully developed, or in looking at their forecast, they're not anticipated to have a substantive growth forecasted for 2050, or for consistency with smaller communities that are similar communities, known development patterns, et cetera. So you will see a few communities now that are in a less developed community designation than Thrive, like Medicine Lake. So these are the changes that we are proposing as part of the next draft.
Mr. Chair, just
Yeah,
so
Councilmember
thank you for
Johnson.
Medicine Lake. We chatted about that, and Loretto is good with what you did too.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And Blaine, too.
Yes.
Yes.
As I mentioned, we talked with all of the communities, so we're good.
Thank you.
And so then this is the revised map, and you'll see that in the draft that was attached to the meeting materials today as well. I did get that in the land use stuff. I didn't provide it early enough for Lisa to include it in the vision values and stuff and the upfront stuff, but we will get those consistencies across the policy areas resolved. So based on all of the public feedback that I've managed to comb through so far, under construction, a couple of things that are to come. We're going to review community designation descriptions to really ensure that there is concise, differentiation between community designation descriptions, so we'll look at that. We're also going to provide a visual representation of Met Council and local government roles and responsibilities. We'll do that by urban and rural service area, and where necessary by community designation. Just to really clarify, we heard a lot of comments about not only is it required or not, but is this a local role or a Met Council role? And we're really trying to make sure that we're clarifying that throughout. So we do have some minor changes proposed that you'll see throughout the policy chapter. A lot of these are additional context in some areas, updated maps, clarification, like I just mentioned, of roles and responsibilities, some clarification of terms related to requirements or not, improvements for which we hope will either add simplicity to reduce redundancy or for clarity. We also have some specific additions that are a bit broader. First, related to clarity on flexibility, which I have on a slide coming up. Additional clarity for rural policies, also on a slide coming up. Added a section on roles and responsibilities, so we added text as well, and added an implementation section to outline at a high level the technical assistance, funding, and other resources related to local comprehensive plans that the Met Council is committing to providing. So we heard a need for clarification on what flexibility means. That was a very consistent comment, and we wanted to try and address this intentionally and in an organized way so that local governments would really be clear about what the Met Council is committing to. First, prioritizing our partnerships with local governments as we're working through a lot of these things. We do have to do analysis and conversation with local governments, and those things are necessary in order for us to update administrative guidelines, which is how the Met Council delegates to staff how we are supposed to implement regional policy. So we consolidated a couple of actions and built out a series of commitments so that the council would carry forward as those guidelines would be adopted, and that's in the text that was provided for you as well.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah,
And
Councilmember
again,
Johnson.
can you, if you go back just quickly, so clarifying flexibility and implementation, and it's for objective 1, policy 2, action 3V3? Yep, that's Roman numeral something. Yeah, 3.8. Okay. Is this around density specifically, or is this kind of woven throughout that whole section? Or because I don't have that section right in front of me, so I'm just trying to read fast. Is this basically talking about the approach to density?
This is talking about, excuse me,
No,
Chair
please,
and committee members. This is about how we would update and adopt administrative guidelines, ensuring a balanced and flexible approach to how we implement policy. It doesn't just apply to density, although yes, it does. We have flexible development guidelines, we have MUSA implementation guidelines, we have a series of guidelines that help us be clear to communities how we would calculate something like net residential density. And there are some things that we can evaluate programmatically as well. And so just trying to provide a full view, since flexibility was a question for a lot of commenters, on how we would approach that, ensuring that we are committed to a flexible and balanced approach. We obviously want to be consistent with regional policy and in conformance with our system plans, but we also want to do that in partnership with local governments to the extent possible.
Thank you. Ms. Torres.
That's a lot.
We also heard and identified a need to clarify or add context on orderly annexation areas, on how the council might evaluate land capacity, and that certain development patterns that preclude future urban services are not encouraged, especially in rural center areas where there might be property adjacent or near a city's existing boundary that maybe a formal orderly annexation agreement exists to phase that into being within the city. And so just talking a little bit more clearly about how that works, and the council's role is somewhat limited in that way, but we're trying to be very explicit about how we can support rural communities, rural centers, and some suburban edge communities as well, as they're kind of dealing with their tensions between cities and townships in those areas. So that being said, I have some very specific questions for clarity, and I would appreciate it for staff's benefit that if we could address one at a time, and so that we have clear direction following the meeting if possible. So I can turn it over to the chair to facilitate the discussion questions.
Or please, Ms. Torres, feel free.
Okay. First, do you agree with the proposed changes to community designations? Do you have any questions, or is there anything else?
Then I'll
Community
triage.
designations.
How does
Yeah,
that sound?
yes.
The queue. Councilmember Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the process you went through on community designations. I think they make sense. I think LUAC was on board. Number two, though,
We're
probably
doing one
wasn't
at a
shared with
time,
them.
one at a time.
No, I'm not
Okay,
going into it. Wow. I'm just saying, when we get to number two, I think that might change. I don't know if they knew that that was going to happen in the number one discussion, but I love how you guys did the community designations way more clear. Seems to make sense coming from the last, the Thrive plan. So
Thank you.
I support that.
Thank you, Councilmember. I didn't mean to drop the hammer quite so hard.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
number two is going to be
dang,
the
I've been following the
juiciest
rules all night long.
discussion.
Okay.
So, okay, so to the first question.
Were there any other comments on the?
Any other comments on that? I see 2 thumbs up from Councilmember Wolf, nodding heads all up and down. That yes. So on to number 2.
So what we've all been waiting for today. No, just kidding. Do you want to change or keep the same the proposed minimum average density for suburban edge communities currently proposed and recommended at 4 units per acre?
Councilmember Johnson.
Clarifying question. So again, this is just suburban edge communities, not suburban.
Chair and council members, we didn't hear as much feedback in opposition to density requirements from other community designations. So I feel as though suburban edge is the primary area of.
And Mr. Chair, just to be clear, suburban though is not the going to a 4.
Suburban, excuse me, Chair and committee members, they're increasing from 5 to 7.
Okay, because I had an early letter from one of my cities that, okay, so I just want to make sure that that was checked. Okay. I am having a ton of heartburn on this because I have a bunch of communities that have written all kinds of umpteen papers to me of very important things, and I've read through them all. Thank you to Michael for the highlighter. That was very helpful. Metro Cities has, some thoughts on it as well as they're taking in their feedback. And I've heard from cities outside of District 1 that have given me really very strong reasons why they have grave concerns about going to 4. I've heard from cities that want flexibility, and I know that in some discussion, again, I want to thank Angela and the team for coming out talking to a couple of my cities prior to all of this, where there might be some flexibility. I guess we're not supposed to use the word workaround. But that, to me, I think is also very concerning for cities because cities like clarity, cities like roles, cities like to know who's doing what and who's on first. So for me, I'm going to have, at this moment in time, a hard time going to 4 based on the feedback all of my cities have been giving that kind of go deeper than the comments things that I've been getting. I also would love to still meet with staff and some of these cities to work through what their particular concerns are. I have some of them. I have some really clear examples of cities outside of my district that I'm compelled for. So I am not supportive of going to 4 right now. I like ranges 3 to 5. If they want to go up to 5 instead of just 4, great. But if they need to stay at 3, great. So that's where I'm at right now. And I'm going to be pretty strident on that just because I feel like I need to represent those communities that are, for all kinds of reasons, wringing their hands about this. It's not that I don't want to work with them. I understand the rationale. But right now, I can't go to 4.
Further discussion, Councilmember Wolf, then Councilmember Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a hard no on 4. We didn't used to have all of these different densities. The region sort of naturally got more dense as it aged. And cities have adapted over time to whatever the market needs are. And for the few communities that are struggling to get to 3, I think we should just work more intensely with them, but trust the communities who are adapting to whatever the need is, that they're going to be responsible in their development. There are times when that flexibility helps council goals. Like Lakeville had a 10-acre property that was a big oak forest, and the city couldn't afford to buy it and didn't have a need for a park in that particular spot, but they worked with the developer to have larger lots, but site the houses strategically in the oak forest so you could preserve as many of the healthy trees as possible. If you're trying to pack everything in tightly, that means you have to clear cut and grade the whole thing. And I don't think that necessarily meets the council's or city's goals in every situation. I think having that flexibility to adjust to the market, adjust to different site needs without reinventing the wheel, I think the process is working now for the most part across the region. And this was something that LUAC felt pretty strongly about at our last meeting, that going to 4 was a doing to cities rather than working with cities. So to me, what matters most is what the people who are most impacted by that policy think, not, oh, I think you should use a stick on the other guy and tell them what to do. I mean, I don't tell Minneapolis or St. Paul what to do. I figure they have local control and can figure their stuff out. I think we should have the same respect for the suburban edge communities and let them adapt as the market needs, but give them the flexibility that 3 gives for situations where the market wants something that is not quite as dense.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Carter.
Thank you. I have taken a look at the materials, and in the materials here, as we look at the clarifying flexibility and implementation and the clarifying the clarifying flexibility and implementation in particular, I ask myself the question, as I hear the concerns that are coming from these communities, I want to ask myself the question and really try to understand the response that could come as a result of some of these items that we're clarifying and some of the additional flexibility. We spoke about it in the regional development group as not workarounds, right? But flexibility and motivation and incentive. And I also almost look at some of these clarifications as the nudge that helps us get to where we're going. It's it's really true that we've become more dense as the area has grown, and that density is continuing. The nudge, kind of the gentle nudge, appears to be these areas that we're excluding, new ways we're looking at the evaluations and calculations. I see the last, and there are a number of other things here. I see the last comment and want to ask a question about that with respect to density. If we are providing necessary tools, resources, technical assistance to help local governments meet planning expectations, what could that look like in the case of density? And I know there are a lot of other things here as well, but what could that look like?
Ms. Torres.
Chair and committee members, thank you for the question. We have a lot of tools already. Some of them are the administrative guidelines, which help us be very clear with local governments about how we do our work and what they can expect as part of the comprehensive plan review process. But we will be preparing templates. We have some online tools. Most importantly, and I think most helpful, is that we have a team of sector representatives that work hand in hand individually with local staff where we explore scenarios, we problem solve. We're professional planners working with professional planners. We are the ones that have to implement regional policy. We work to understand the local concerns in each unique situation, and we work to help them find ways where regional needs and local goals are coming together. And we have done that for many planning cycles. The team is they're exceptional, and they're really committed to customer service, and they approach local governments respectfully, and we do our work with them kind of hand in hand. When they tell us that they need resources, we develop that. If they're like, well, I'm not sure how to calculate this, so we provide some guidelines for that. We need a template to do our land use analysis. We'll provide them with that. Differentiating between maybe within the MUSA and without the MUSA, outside the MUSA, so we try and individualize as much as we can do.
What is clear, I think, to me, as I look over this page in particular, is that we are really, the staff has looked to language that illustrates a bending over backward to help get to where we're likely going. As we look at the needs that we have across the region, for people to live and resources to be shared, we're trying to get to where we're going. And so I ask that question, as I look at this page, what, with thoughtful consideration of this kind of flexibility, would a response from those governments look like today? And I know the representatives who are having those conversations and who have this great angst are also considering that as we talk today. I would like to be in support of 4. I don't want to do it to anybody either. But this does feel to me as though we're trying to do it we're trying to provide as much assistance and as much collaboration and as many changes as we possibly can, but with a nudge and even perhaps an incentive to help. And that's just the comment I wanted to make as I look at this, because I know how difficult it is.
Thank you, Councilmember Ivanq. Councilmember Dolkar, then Councilmember Wolf. Councilmember Dolkar.
So this is one area that I'll admit I'm least educated when it comes to Met Council, but the 2 questions I'm holding are, do we know the number of cities that are going to be impacted by changes from 3 to 4? As a person who doesn't do planning, that doesn't seem like a huge jump, but I also, when I'm reviewing the local government comments, this has come up quite a bit and I can't tell how many of them are impacted. And then the second question I have is, if we move forward with 4 designation and a city fails to meet it, what are the consequences to that? Yeah.
Great. I'm sure Ms. Torres has answers for your questions, Councilmember.
I do. Thank you. I was just writing down the
Yep,
question.
appreciate it.
Number of cities impacted, a number of cities within the suburban edge designation. Don't know off the top of my head, but it's between 40 and 45. Some of those are actually part of orderly annexation agreements, and so they're included in that, but they're going to be planned by the city that is annexing that land into the municipal boundaries. And so I can get you the specific number. I don't have it off the top of my head. The second question, if we move forward and a city fails to meet the density requirements, what happens? First, we work very hard with local governments so that they have a path forward and that there are decisions that they can make locally, options we try to provide and work through as much as possible. But if a city is inconsistent with density policy, there are implications when it comes time for sewer permit issuance, as well as availability of programs like Livable Communities Act funds. So.
And Angela, if I may.
Please, Director Roberts.
In the comp plan, we don't experience this, but in the comp plan, if a city doesn't meet their 4 units an acre, then the staff's analysis is on whether that plan is more likely than not to be a substantial impact on or departure from our regional sewer plan. So earlier this year, when we were reviewing North Oak's comprehensive plan amendment, we were going down that plan conformance pathway because we were seeing that as a substantial departure. They weren't meeting the 3 units an acre. That is the current Thrive minimum designation requirement. So that would be if, when we're reviewing the whole plan, that we would be looking for that and evaluating whether the number of units that are being supported would represent a substantial departure or substantial impact to the regional sewer system.
Councilmember Dwalker?
Go ahead first.
Well, I have Councilmember Wolf, then
in the queue
Councilmember
late.
Lindquist, and Councilmember Johnson. So,
I'll wait for the queue
okay,
to come back.
sounds good. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I lost my train of thought all of a sudden. I was trying to understand Councilmember Carter's comment about people needing a nudge. Is that a suggestion that communities are not meeting the market needs for density? I'm trying,
Or affordability.
And density doesn't always equal affordability either. I know when Lakeville, when I was on the planning commission back in the late 90s, early aughts, that as Lakeville was putting their new comp plan into effect, we actually had to have a moratorium for a short period of time to update the zoning ordinances to go with the new comp plan, because we had added some new land uses that hadn't been in before. But city staff were getting all these calls about how many units per acre can we put on this property so we know how much to pay for it. So it doesn't mean that the land is going to be any cheaper per unit, because the builders already figure that in how much they're going to pay for the price of land. There's a lot in the plan that suggests that density equals affordability or contributes to affordability, but that's not necessarily how it works in the actual market. And the suburban edge communities are the only, and the rural centers are the only parts of the region where you can do sewered single-family development, because the other areas, the suburban and urban and whatnot, are so built up and the land prices are so high that unless you're a millionaire and you're tearing down somebody else's house and, putting a big house on that other lot, single family just doesn't happen much in Minneapolis, for example. Newly platted single family is not a common thing to happen. So if we restrict the density too much, we restrict the ability for people to have single family homes in the 7-county metro area, new ones. And so people either go outside of the 7-county metro area to Cannon Falls or Monticello or Otsego, and they're doing that right now because the land is cheaper, or they don't come to this region at all. And we still have a very strong demand for single-family homes. When we looked at the occupancy study earlier this year with the population estimates, Single family ran 97, 98% occupancy in most of the jurisdictions, where multifamily and quad and triplex and duplex were running in the low 90s, upper 80s for most communities. So it's not that we aren't building density enough for what people want. There's certainly an affordability issue that is coming up for people to afford what they want, but communities are already responding to the density needs. And particularly when you start out developing, developers don't want to do multifamily in the really early stages of a community's development. In Lakeville, we went 30 years without a market rate apartment building being built because there was no developer interest. It was all subsidized housing that we worked with the Dakota County CDA for senior housing, for family housing and whatnot. But 30 years is a long time to go without an apartment building. Farmington just had to subsidize a market rate apartment building to get one in their community because they had the same, they're a little behind Lakeville in their development patterns, you know, a little smaller, and a little farther back in the development wheel. But they had to actually do TIF and subsidize a market rate apartment building because, like, once again, they were only getting subsidized apartments. And so if we act like maybe cities aren't doing what they should and so that we need to go to 4 in order to give them a nudge, we're not really giving them credit for the good work that they've been doing all of this time. And it will be seen as a very do it to them rather than with them sort of a thing. That's why there was so many comments from suburban edge communities, because they feel like we're not listening to them, we're not partnering with them in this, and they want to be treated as a partner, not a underling. That's why I feel so strongly about the 3 versus 4. We keep talking about, well, we could, you know, adjust this and adjust that to make the numbers work, but fundamentally, if you're trying to adjust everything to make the numbers work, you're saying that it doesn't really need to be 4. There's not a financial reason in our sewer system to do that. The sewer system is doing fine financially, and we don't regulate any of the business density or the amount of parkland, so it's not really, you know, that big of a deal. If we don't care how big a business property is or a church property, why are we micromanaging the single family part of it? If there's not a technical reason or a financial reason, then we should just leave things as be and not have a solution in search of a problem is really how I feel on this.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Lindstrom, then Councilmember Johnson.
Thanks. Mr. Chair, I'm a hard yes on 4. These are communities within the Metropolitan Urban Service area. That means, by definition, they have increased services, including wastewater, transit, highways, et cetera. And that density helps with those services, there's no question. Having a higher density reduces pressure on our agricultural lands in the region. It reduces pressure on our natural systems. I support it for those reasons. And this state and this region has some serious goals around greenhouse gas reductions. We ought to take the actions to help meet those goals, or we ought to just scratch those goals right off the books. And so this is one step. It's not the panacea, but it is one step that we can do that without a doubt will help meet those goals for our region and our state.
Thank you, Councilmember. I have in queue Councilmembers Johnson, Councilmember Dolkar, and Wolf. Councilmember Johnson.
So, a couple of things. So, having been a mayor a long time ago, you know that as well, Councilmember Lindstrom, very different communities, the whole shebang. But, you know, we were a lower density community. We came out, there were cornfields. There you go. We didn't even know about wetlands and infill, so we got built on wetlands and all those things. We've learned a lot, changed our ways. We're not a 3 units per acre anymore, because guess what? We've aged.
And now we're in redevelopment mode, and we're gonna look more like St. Louis Park. And now we're at the 7 units per acre. And the city's like, cool. We couldn't have done that 20 years ago because we were new and we were developing and we didn't even have the MUSA all in place and we were still growing. We didn't have great highways. We had our own little transit system that was the opt-out back in the day, now known as a suburban provider, but we didn't have a lot of resources from the Met Council. We didn't have a lot of resources and we had to pull back and take some of our money to do our own transit system. But today, we're becoming, again, that grown-up, more dense, and moving into the higher density. And a lot of new apartments are coming in, very hard working with the HRA to bring in affordability. And you're right, density does not mean affordability. If you go ahead and have a high-dense zoning district, the big-time developers that want to make a lot of money with really high expensive apartments and condos for really rich people will be happy to do it. So you have to get ahead of that so that you can make sure that the affordability comes in, and that's more difficult to do, but it's doable, and I've done it. Yes, Councilmember Lindstrom, we have very important goals. I don't think 3 units per acre is running away from that. I know that these cities one day will be like New Hope was back in the day, like Golden Valley was back in the day, where they were farmland, they were emerging, they were county roads oriented. There were no highways out here. I'm old enough to remember when 169 was County Road 81, and there are a lot of farm fields out here, but those communities have all changed. They are becoming more dense. It won't be 4 units forever. There will be the day when more density around that eastern edge starts to creep in on them. It might not be in my lifetime, but for sure it's going to happen because that's the way of urban development. I would also say that I've got communities that don't have any transit, that are begging for money to increase lanes and safety improvements on Highway 55 from Plymouth's western edge, Medina, all the way through to Wright County. So they are trying to responsibly manage their growth. John Bottom, a council member from Corcoran, served on LUAC. I believe now the mayor, Tom McKee, will be serving on LUAC. They are very much about wanting to be part of Met Council. But I'm just also wondering, who are the we? We should do this. Well, the we is the we, Met Council, we, the state, we, I guess we, everybody, but there's an important partner there in a local government, and I'm not going to disrespect them. I might not always agree with them, but I really want to hear them out. And I'd invite you to come out and to look at some of the challenges they have. I will be very respectful to Councilmember Morales, but I'm hearing from Andover, and they can't do it with the infrastructure that they have. They don't have the capacity to go to 4. So Councilmember Morales can tell you all about that when we get together with his communities, but there are people at this table that are hearing from their communities. These are good communities. They want to have thriving communities. They want to bring jobs out to their communities. They want investment in their communities. They're people just like you and me, but they're just at a different phase of their development. I can tell you there was a time back in the day when Falcon Heights was probably, a burgeoning little suburb of St. Paul on the north end, and you had the state fair there that was a big help too. And so I believe strongly that one day, just like, the Golden Valleys, the New Hopes, the Crystals, in now the Plymouths and the St. Louis Park, they've all become more dense. You also have to recognize that the awesome city of Minneapolis, with its downtown council, with its chamber of commerce, with all of the organizations that are working to bring in, Mr. Chair knows good and well with Meet Minneapolis, trying to bring people to downtown, because we're not going to give up on our downtown core. So whatever Minneapolis needs and whatever things they're talking about, I'm going to be one of the first people in line to help them because we all work in this together. And all I'm asking is on this Met Council that you all line up with me too when some of these other communities that aren't the urban core might need a little bit of something so you understand what they are also going through. This isn't a we don't want them. This isn't a, it's never going to, look the same again. It's just evolution, and they will eventually also, creep up and probably hit their sewer capacities one day. And with the hope of bringing 40,000 new residents to the downtown area, into the city center area, we're creating densities in other places. It's not like the suburban edge is like, oh, you guys take all the density. They'll get there one day, but they're still trying to manage development, again, with sometimes a lack of resources. I appreciate us having some flexibilities, but are we really then, is there an asterisk to the 4? It's 4, but we've got these, what we aren't calling workarounds, but these flexibilities in these things. Well, then give a range, do the 3 to 5, something like that, so that if they really need to be at 3, and they can work themselves to 4 or 5 by 2050 or beyond, because we'll update this again in 10 years, which I'm sure their densities will go up. And remember, the whole city is not going at one point. They still have a good portion of their cities, at least in my area,
where they can't develop. So they're trying to manage that one piece. If you look at the map, one piece of, say, Corcoran is now moving into this suburban edge piece. And it's where they're trying to, build apartments. We've been out there and talked to them.
They are building apartments.
They are building apartments, thank you. So I guess, I'm just not gonna be, sitting here as somebody who knows what's always best for another community or how they're not doing their part. Because I guess you could have just said Plymouth at one point was in that boat too then based on the numbers we were given, which absolutely isn't true. Come and meet these mayors, come and meet these council members, come and meet their staff people. They're working very hard also to get affordable housing. They're participating in our committees. So if you want to know why they're very nervous about going to 3, read this and go have a conversation and do a site visit with them and get to know their communities. I will be working with Commissioner Kevin Anderson, hopefully after session is done, and we are going to do a tour of District 1, which we largely share, and we're going to look at some of our suburban communities and go all the way out to Maple Plain to show you the diversity of districts that we have. One size does not fit all, and I just, even when I agree with the community designations, but even within that, one size does not fit all. And I'm just asking, and other council members outside of CDC will be asking council members to just look for a way that we can help get these communities to where they want to be and need to be without forcing it on them and making it difficult for them. And again, for all of those people in Andover who are watching tonight, they've got a compelling case that they actually can't do it, and I have no reason to believe that their city official telling me this isn't telling me the truth. So that's why I would like to sit down with staff and my cities and on case-by-case basis try to figure out where those pinch points are. And I know in some of the conversations I've had already, a couple at least, they're like, well, we can probably, figure this out, or there's a way to adjust the densities here and the densities there. And, I just don't know why we would go through that gyration with so many cities when if they're asking for 3, and one day they'll be bumped up just like all the communities ahead of them to a higher density when transit finally makes it out there, when the roads finally make it out there, the county roads get paved to a city standard and all that, probably mostly paid for by the cities unless the county now has more money and wants to do it. I'm on my soapbox because I am a big believer in regional governance. I have taken votes for other communities my entire life. I've been a president of the League of Cities. I voted for every city around this state. I have testified for greater Minnesota cities when maybe my suburban communities going, well, why would they want that? Well, if you go visit them and do an exchange program like the mayor of Moorhead and I did, you start to really understand what other people are going through. So for somebody who's lived in the urban core and somebody who loves our urban core and somebody who loves those communities right around the urban core and all the transformation they're going through. And when I look at St. Louis Park and I live in Plymouth, I go, man, what a model to follow, because look at the cool things they've done. And Plymouth is going to get there. Plymouth just acquired a big site on 494 and 55, or in the process of a hotel that needs to be scraped. And there are some very exciting plans. But back in the day, probably 20 years ago, they couldn't have managed a bigger number. They were still dealing with 3, but they take advantage and the densities are going up. I'm just asking for my cities that I think are bringing compelling arguments forward to at least hear them out at 3. And yes, they have the impact on the greater system. We all do. So I'm just making that appeal tonight. I'm probably in the minority if you count the number of council members that represent those districts. But let me tell you, when Chair Zelli mentioned to me at a council meeting a few days ago, sometimes we have to do with what's just right for the region. I do that every day. And sometimes I need y'all to do what's right for my communities too.
Thank you, Councilmember. I have in queue Councilmembers Dolkar, Wolf, then Lindstrom. But I just want to verify something because it's come up a couple times from Councilmember Johnson, I think. But this idea of a range, that's the status quo, right?
Yes.
That's what we have today, 3 to 5, right? Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I was tracking. All right, further discussion, Councilmember Dolkar.
Couple of just one, thank you, Councilmember Lindstrom. I think my personal sort of alignment is very similar to yours in the sense that I'm personally much more in favor of higher density, and I am in favor of seeing more housing stocks in the region, the options, not just single family homes, but twin condos, twin homes, other type of housing unit, and also being able to build other units of housing within your own backyard, which I think most cities currently do not allow. But I think that's currently being debated actively in legislation. And the reason I say it is I think the vision I hold is everybody in the region has access to transit. They have a walkable streets. They have a, that's the vision I hold, and that's the plan I have. But I think I represent the suburban edge along with the council members, and I am seeing a lot of angst from the cities about it. And again, not being a planner, like I don't know the real impact on the ground, because I do think and I looked through multiple different articles, I do think we're underestimating our capacity to actually do denser community in the region. That's the general sense I'm getting. So my request actually, which goes against what Chair Zelli actually said in the last meeting, is actually do a meeting with the communities that are going to be impacted from this 3 to 4 change. And I realize this is a departure in the process that I've laid out. And again, speaking as somebody who actually is in favor of denser community, I do think the cities who are sort of very opposed to it, and they are actually strongly opposed to it in the comments they wrote, I think meeting with them is worth. Even if we were to move forward with 4, you would still need to meet with those cities and still walk them through all the different options on how they could get there. And I wonder if there's something more to it. But if we want to give them more option and we want to do like 3 to 5 range, which is the current range, then I would say opt for higher, 3 to 6, 3 to 7, like opt for higher and allow the cities who needs to build for denser communities can do so, and cities who want to, which I'm surprised given the housing market, like anybody would want to do 3 per unit, but I understand there are communities who wants to do it, but I would say go for higher range and allow cities to kind of pick where they want to fall in the density. But I will only make that recommendation based on the meetings and actually having a conversations, because I think right now we're having one-sided conversation where we have put out a guidance per acre, units per acre. I'm getting the terminal wrong. And then I think we're seeing the cities react to it, but we haven't had like a dialogue about it.
Thank you, Councilmember. I have in queue now Councilmembers Wolf, Lindstrom, and then Johnson. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, in response to Councilmember Lindstrom's comments, there is no transit or highway improvements planned for most of the suburban edge communities, ever. And I can remember actually testifying at a transportation policy plan public hearing back in the late 90s, early aughts, talking about how it wasn't fair to expect Lakeville to add the population of Golden Valley with no highway improvements. Well, 24 years later, what highway improvements have happened have been financed primarily by City of Lakeville and Dakota County. And if you look at Scott County and Dakota County on the southern part of the metro, Highway 13 is a state highway that goes right along the Minnesota River. The next state highway is down by Northfield. There are no east-west state highways in between the Minnesota River and Northfield, which is not the norm for the rest of the developed parts of the region. They have lots of highways to help people get around, and they have transit. There's nothing planned ever by MnDOT going east-west, ever, for any of that area. So if you up the density, it's not just for the short term, it's for the long term that you're requiring more density with no state investment in transportation, which is not fair. So it's not like, oh, we're giving you all this stuff, now you have to do. It also doesn't preclude getting denser later, which happens naturally. Most of the density happens when something is not the right need at the moment, like your hotel that's being torn down, or a dead strip mall that becomes senior housing. That happens all over the metro all of the time. But if you don't get the single family in first, it pretty much never happens. And we still have a demand for single family. If you put that people can't get single family in the metro, like I said before, they go somewhere else. my sons both left the region and then moved back when they could afford a single-family home. My husband and I moved to Germany for 3 years and then lived in Albert Lea for a year and a half and came back when we could afford a single-family home. If that wasn't possible, he would not have taken his job at the Minneapolis Police Department. He would have accepted the job to work in Wisconsin as an air traffic controller instead, because then we would have been able to have a single-family home because they make a lot more money. But trying to micromanage people on this density thing in the idea that that's going to change their carbon footprint is not realistic, especially if you're having more density with no transportation infrastructure. That just means more people sitting at a traffic light burning fossil fuels as they're waiting. So I've said before that we should be doing with cities, not to cities. And I wholeheartedly believe that, because that's what happened all of the rest of the metro. We didn't have all of this micromanaging of density in the core. That came up in the last round of comprehensive plans where we started ratcheting it up. Density happens naturally over time, and there's not a reason financially or in terms of investment that they have to return to us, because there is no investment other than sewer, which they're paying connection fees for and covering the costs, to say that you need to do something different from what you've been doing and what's been working in the region since 1972.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the good news is that we've done a density analysis as part of this whole process. And here is what that density analysis has concluded. It is concluded that despite higher density ranges developed in the past decade, overall developed density remains below planned minimum densities. Overall developed densities in the past decade are insufficient to bring the overall density of development to minimum planned densities. Despite some communities building at higher densities, very low densities are still being developed in other communities within the same community designation. So I think we ought to change the way we've been doing things. If we expect a different result, then we ought to change. If we want to do the same thing and have the same results, leave it the way it is. But I think we can do better.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Johnson.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I just, I've had the discussions with staff too about, not meeting the densities. I would also say though, that in the last 10 years, that's just 10 years. So we had a pandemic too that pretty much stopped development. I'm not saying that is in and of itself, but there've been a lot of, an economic downturn in 2008. But I have seen, to Councilmember Dolkar's point, Plymouth was largely a large lot, single family, but we are now townhomes and row homes and apartments and senior housing and affordable housing, and apartment applications are coming in left and right. And the biggest development ever in Plymouth, which is a redevelopment, is going to be walkable and dense with jobs and grocery stores and parks and all the things. So it will happen over time. And again, to the point about having a meeting, Councilmember Dolkar, with these communities, I've been asking for that for a month. It is too hard to do on this timeline. I asked if this timeline could be adjusted at all to make time for something like that to happen, with 3 major holidays between Thanksgiving and New Year's and other cultural and religious holidays in between all of that. And there's just not enough time. So we're on a path where, it's a big deal, right? We've been doing this thing. Public comments come in. We're going to hear about them. We'll get a grid. We'll do all the things. I have yet to be able, other than I will say I listened in on one online discussion that was had, and we don't interact or talk.
maybe other council members have gone out and had community forums on this, but I haven't participated in any of that, and I don't know about any of those. I'm just trying to represent my communities and hear them out. And maybe everybody should hear them out to understand what their concerns are. Because I take at face value that people's intentions are good. And I take at face value that people understand their responsibilities and their rights. So, if we want to do to cities, great. I think we should then do as Councilmember Dolkar and I have been asking, and I know Councilmember Cedarburg, Councilmember Morales, Councilmember Wolf, and others were like, yeah, that'd be great, let's do that. But didn't really get support from staff on that, and I understand they're busy and they're on a really tough timeline to do these things, so I backed off of it. So tonight is the night, but I don't want to also, put on these emerging communities where they're starting to see real growth and the pressures of people wanting these larger lot developments. And Councilmember Wolf is right. If people can't find the new construction with single-family homes, now mind you, I'll mention Corcoran and Dayton again. They're building all of the others too. It's not just single-family homes because there's a spread of it. If you want the large lot, half-acre home, you've got to do denser over here, right? They spread it around. It's not just going to be single-family homes. So I want us to really hear out what these concerns are. I want us to, we're all in, we all understand, I think, more than ever, and I'll be political, with changes in DC, it's gonna be harder and harder and harder. But I would like my communities to, be partners with us on things and not feel like their deep concerns are not being heard. I think staff is hearing them. I think staff, to the point of the slide that Councilmember Carter has in front of her, I think those will be things that we can try to work with them, but cities want certainty. That we'll figure it out later, or there's gotta be a way we can do some things to help you get to what you need in a different way doesn't set well with cities or metro cities for that fact. So we'll do what we're gonna do. I respect everybody's point of view up here. I respect each individual up here. I know we're all trying to get to the right place. But there's a reason that I think that the districts that you all represent, if your communities or constituencies were coming forward and saying, hey, this is a big problem for us, we really need your help, I would be first in line to go, what is the problem? Let me help, even if it wasn't my folks, right? That's the big picture. So I'm asking others to just try to understand what that big picture is and just give some room for these communities to kind of express what their concerns and fears are with the increase going up and up and up. So that's it.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Whitman, then what I'm hoping for at the end of this meeting, that we can give clear direction to staff, right? I think we owe them that, and I appreciate everyone lifting up their positions in a respectful way and everything, but by the end of this meeting, which probably won't be too much longer, we need to tell staff what our direction is. And we don't normally take votes. I don't know if we want to do thumbs up, thumbs down, but we need to come to some kind of direction for staff. We owe that to staff. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the density report, I was here when we came up with the densities the last round, and they were never intended to get the entire community up to that number. Those densities were for the areas that were being redeveloped, recognizing what would likely happen because of the cost of land and other development pressures. It was never intended, and it kind of bothers me that it ended up in the density report kind of presenting that as a failure, because it was never intended for that. It was just recognizing what normally happens at this stage in a community's development. So it's not that we're failing as a region. In fact, there's been tremendous redevelopment throughout the region that we've seen and that we've helped subsidize, and some has happened without any subsidy. So I don't take that density report as a failure and a reason why we need to do something different, because that was never the intent of the density numbers to begin with, to get the entire community, because Minneapolis is like 6 or something overall, because they have a lot of single family, and then there's, industrial and other things going on. So I understand Councilmember Lindstrom's concerns, but I would be more than happy to take you for a tour in the suburban edge portions of the region to show you the diversity of development that's already happening, and also remind the entire committee that when we do those calculations, that doesn't include local streets. And the density number is not just the lot. It's not a third of an acre lot. It's local streets, it's stormwater things. My yard, 2/3 of my yard is under a drainage and utility easement because my yard backs up to Cedar Avenue, so I need a little bit of space to be sane with the 40,000 cars that go past my backyard every day. But then there's berming, there's a drainage swale. So it's not that you're having all these huge lots when you're at 3 units per acre, because local streets take up space. The boulevards and infrastructure, sidewalks all take up space. And so come and see what development is happening. I would be more than happy to give you a tour and show you the diversity of development that's happening, but it still can be challenging year to year to stay above 3 units per acre, particularly if you have a downturn in the apartment market. Right now, Lakeville's got apartments popping up everywhere, but that hasn't always been the case. And we need to be recognizing the natural evolution of cities, and most multifamily land that was zoned multifamily when I moved into Lakeville still hasn't been developed. It's the dead strip malls or commercial property that just never developed as commercial that end up being apartment buildings. So it's not that they're not cooperating, it's just how development works.
Thank you, Councilmember. So we need to give our staff direction on this. So right now, if we took a vote, I'm guessing it would be 3-2. I don't know if it still work. Do you have any recommendations, Director Ross?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I would just point out the obvious. We don't have a full group here tonight
Right.
either. We're probably split, although I think in general, we know how hard the staff has worked. We're on this one thing. So 99.9% of this, I think we're in vehement agreement.
Right.
Let's not lose sight of that. But I would just say that if we are going to take a hard vote and we're split, we convey that. We weren't a full,
Right.
and there was long discussion about it, and I don't know.
Yeah.
I know that Sue Vento feels strongly about 3, but she had to leave.
Right.
And I know that Gail Cederberg and Morales are very concerned. Amongst the council members that represent the suburban edge, it's predominantly, let's go with 3 and just leave it there rather than mess with going to 4. I know Deb Barber was also on the 3 side rather than the 4 side.
Well, I don't want to impose votes on any council member that isn't here. And at the end of the day, it's a council vote, right?
Right.
It's going to be thumbs up or thumbs down. But I just want to know how the staff can go forward. And I just want to comment on something, and just in fairness to, well, I guess it's not fairness, but this issue of not engaging these suburban edge communities, I just don't understand that. And I want to say in fairness, I've said since the beginning of this process, my first recommendation was let's just divide it in quarters and do one each. And that's just not how the process went. I can't tell staff what to do. I'm not the authority in this organization, but I don't understand what and I know that it's coming from, the chair, it's coming from the regional administrator as well. And I don't get it. To me, at the end of the day, there's going to be people who feel like winners and people who feel like losers. But in my experience in public policy, if people feel like they've been engaged to an appropriate level, they can live with it.
Yes, they can.
Right? And I feel like we have just set ourselves up to be in this point, like you're saying, Councilmember Johnson. So I don't know what we can do from this committee to see that those conversations can happen. But I'm just airing my opinion, and it's probably because it's late and I'm grouchy. I don't know why it didn't happen earlier, and I still think it should happen, because I think it will just make the resolution of this easier. So I know I'm not helping give staff direction here at all, and I apologize. But yeah, Councilmember Wolf.
So were you saying that you three are saying 4 and 2 say 3?
That's what I would guess
But
if we want to go to a vote, but
Well, I mean, I think the rest of us have always been supportive of things in the core going on, and it's a little frustrating that there isn't that same cooperation in the other direction.
Councilmember Carter, did you want to say something? Or?
I was going to say that is always the tension.
Agreed.
Whether you're in the core or if you're in the suburbs. That is always a tension that's at the table. And I think we're recognizing it more and more currently. I want to be supportive of working together with our communities, whether they are core communities or suburban, rural, whoever they are.
Agree.
And I also would want to be able to share this news, which I do think is impactful in terms of its inclination to collaborate, to work with, to bend over backward. The nudge that I spoke of is that we're all growing. And as we talk about the natural tendency to increase density as we grow, I believe that too. I do believe that the help that comes from, these red line or these red comments here is different than what we've seen perhaps in the past. Evaluate is not a firm do it differently, but evaluate net residential density calculations guidance, assess the implications of excluding stormwater management areas, permanent public easements, and others. We're looking at, with all of these statements, doing things that help those communities who want to work toward responding to the density that the region needs, and also, helping them to get there is our goal. As we look at our regional goals and being responsible and being responsive to the growth of the region, really being able to share resources throughout the region, getting communities to transit ability over time, responding to their growth. I think it makes sense for us to look at how we move this forward. At the same time, I think it makes sense for us to look at how we discuss it with these communities. I want them to know, that these are staff suggestions that we are looking at. And I really want to hear from them. I want that discussion to be able to happen, and perhaps we can recommend from this committee that we find a way for that communication to happen.
I'm supportive of that recommendation. I also want to just point out, there's issues of infrastructure that communities need to grow, and it doesn't happen that the infrastructure goes into place and then the community grows. I grew up in Ham Lake in Anoka County, just off Highway 65, and the way Highway 65 looked when we moved there in 1965 and the way it looks today is very different because the development in the North Metro drove the infrastructure investment. So just to be really clear, I don't know that we can sit here and wait till state highways can be built into all of these communities. It's not really a chicken before that. It's the increased density then drives some of the infrastructure investment. So I just want to put that out there. And again, trying to get to direction for our staff. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our transportation plan doesn't have any future state highway alignments ever through that area going east-west. And even with all of the new money that we have for transit, most suburban edge communities are never planned to have transit. So it's not a matter of you just need to do this and then you're going to get the investment. We've already said there will be no investment.
So I would just point out, Councilmember, plans change, right, based on shifting conditions. No one's been more forceful in our advocacy for transit to Plymouth than Councilmember Johnson. I suspect that because of the growth that you're trying to accommodate and encourage, we will see some kind of transit within our lifetimes out there. And that's growth driving investment, right?
Mr. Chair, just a clarification.
Yeah.
So Plymouth did have transit because we were one of the early opt-outs because we
Plymouth,
were pretty irritated that we were putting all of our money into transit and getting nothing back. So the legislature in its wisdom said, okay, you can keep money and start. So we've always had a system. Maple Grove has had a system, and others have done that. So there has been that has been very micro.
Right.
And yes, thank you, but we're 80-some thousand people now, and we're still begging for BRT on 55.
Right.
So we went from, when I showed up, we were probably around 50,000, which was still a pretty big city with a bunch of horses running around and farms and part of it. But we're over 80,000 now, and we're still hoping for it. So you're both right, but we weren't
Right.
7 or 14 units an acre back then. We had to start at probably an acre, half an acre on the county roads, and then now we're at 3 acres and, and on and on. That's what's gonna happen in these next level of the communities. What we're trying to do, though, is say, get denser before you have these services. The sewer pipes are there, you guys figure it out, but you remember, too, that they're not gonna do their entire community. They're doing a swath of their community where they intersect with roads and sewer pipes coming from different directions that they're getting. It is not easy for them, and they don't have transit. I don't know about Minnesota Valley down there, but.
No, Lakeville has 2 park-in rides with very limited express service. That's
And maybe one day Plymouth or Maple Grove can move out and hit, because Dayton now wants it, Rogers now wants it, and maybe Corcoran, but we're not in a position in those 2 communities to do that yet either, although hopeful that maybe through the county we'll get some money, who knows. We're all right tonight. We're all right in the things we're saying. None of us have said anything that is wrong or disrespectful. We know there are big problems that we have to solve. We're all in on that. We're pretty well politically aligned here, so there's none of that weird stuff going on. But there are real tensions as communities develop. And there are real tensions. Look at our beloved Minneapolis and St. Paul, what they're facing now. I think their best days are still ahead of them, but they're having real struggles trying to figure it out. And you know what? People gather around that and go, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a bet and we're going to change things. Well, the suburban communities are doing their first round of this stuff. We're just at different phases. So all I'm saying is listen to them. And Councilmember Carter, I appreciate the things that you're saying with all of these things that we could do, the nudge, so to speak. I mean, I think we've offered this to these teams already. I sat in meetings where we were talking about, I think there's a way we can get at this. I'm not sure, and I'll say it on TV, I'm not sure the electeds understood that. Maybe the planner understood that a little bit after the meeting. But I'm just dealing with the pages and pages from their planners and their folks that are saying this is a problem, Metro Cities. Again, big city organization, they have the urban core, they have the suburban, and they're saying it. So I just am asking for people to hear them out. And I don't know how we hear them out, but I'm gonna go meet with them. By the time we talk about this again, I'll have a nice little report for what my communities are saying. If staff wants to come along, great. If they don't, that's fine too. It's hard for me though, because I thought maybe we'd get something going. I hear council members want, I hear some of you saying we should have been doing this. Mr. Chair, I don't know who tells staff what to do. I agree, regional administrator and chair certainly have that greater authority than we do. But, I'm sitting here with 11 cities. Thank you on behalf of Minnesota Lake. Thank you on behalf of Loretto, because, the things that needed to be changed, there were things that really needed to be changed. They were very obvious. But these other ones are more nuanced. And so it is what it is. And if anybody wants to come to meetings with me, I'll once again try to put it together during a really busy time. I don't know if it'll even make a difference, if my efforts will be worth it, because this thing's coming fast at us in January and it'll come fast at us for a final vote in February. I never really understood why we couldn't slow this down just a little bit. I guess though, with 90-some% of it done and 27 or whatever communities struggling with this, it's not enough to pump the brakes a little bit. So, if tonight we're outvoted, but I'm not going away. I would invite you to come to my communities to, I don't know.
Mr. Chair, can I?
Yeah,
I'm actually really thinking about resigning. I know one council member has already put in a resignation. I'm not going to say who, but I just feel like this is something I know a lot about and have thought about for a long time. And it's the technical things, if you put enough loopholes in 4, it's actually 3. But it's the principle of treating our cities as partners rather than somebody that we're going to do something to. They're not dumb. They know what they're doing. And they've been doing a good job, just like other communities did along the way. And by the way, 169 was 18. It was not 81.
Oh, sorry, 18. Thank you.
Because I remember the dirt.
Yeah.
But the idea that the suburban council members just don't matter and are going to be outvoted by the core council members is worrisome to me.
Mr. Chair, just let me do a quick point
Yeah,
of order.
please,
So we're all tired. And Councilmember, with all due respect, nobody's saying that we don't matter. I don't believe that for a minute. I think we all matter. If I thought that, then I just think we all matter. But I think we're tired. So I think, when do we meet again as a body, a CDC?
December 16th.
Is there any way we can just carry over and give this time on the 16th and try to get everybody there who's missing tonight and be refreshed? Maybe make some calls to some communities if they'd like to come to that meeting and just give 1 or 2 examples of what their heartburn is. I'm trying to solve in one meeting
appreciate it.
a lot of goals so that we can get to the January meeting without blowing it up,
Director Ross.
having people resign.
We should, Mr. Chair, council members, we have some business items on the agenda, but we should be able to accommodate additional discussion.
And Mr. Chair,
Yep.
I don't know what business items there are, but anything you can move to consent?
We'll look at it. We have agenda setting tomorrow morning with staff, so we'll look at that.
Great, thank you, I appreciate that. I appreciate the suggestion. Also, first from the tenor of this conversation, I will carry it as a recommendation to the chair that we do more direct engagement with the suburban edge communities. So I'll make that commitment. We've deferred this decision then till the 17th. And I want to really thank, the 16th?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And I want to thank staff for hanging in here and for all this work. And as you can tell, these are big deal issues, right? And I think it's worthwhile to take the time. And I agree with you, Councilmember Johnson. Thanks for saying it. Nobody's saying somebody doesn't matter. We just disagree, and we'll have to find our way to agreement, which I'm confident that we will. Cool. Are people comfortable?
A second, you're cool.
Thank you. I feel like a failure as a chair at times like this, but we're moving forward. So thank you so much, Ms. Torres. Thank you, Director Barajas, to everyone. And seeing no further business before this committee, we're adjourned.